Welcome to Home Gym History. My name is Rob, and if this is the first time you're tuning in, this is the podcast all about not just the home gym, but where the items came from that you have gotten so used to. And I am so lucky to have Bert Sorin on the podcast tonight. Welcome, Bert.
Hey, Rob. Thanks so much for having me. It's really cool. I got following you guys a while ago, and I love the content. It's kind of funny. It's something I wished was out there years ago. I was like, it'd be cool if someone would like catalog all this stuff because there's so much interesting Iron Game history. But really up until recently, it was such a very few group of people that really cared.
Sure.
So I'm really pumped to see like this new generation of people like really getting into it and cataloging some of this. This is awesome what you're doing. So thank you for doing it.
I appreciate it. I mean, it's there's a lot of great information out there and a lot of good sources out there, but I know what you mean. When I try to research something, when I try to get into something, a lot of times there's a lot of patchwork and kind of stitching it together to try to make sense of it. So what we'll be making sense of tonight, and the impetus of this is the landmine attachment, because looking around my home gym and just thinking about things that I like to use and things that I don't really know the history of, I started digging into the landmine, and it quickly led me right back to sorinx.com. And when I looked on there, I thought, oh, it says they invented it. So then I noticed Bert on Instagram, and we messaged a little bit, and here we are. But the cool thing about it, listeners, is that the landmine, as I was just saying to Bert before we started recording, gives a great segue just into his career and his life. So, getting into Sorin X, if you don't know, if you've been living in a cave, listeners, Sorin X is a leading manufacturer of lifting equipment. If you go back to my episode on the history of the blob and modern grip training, I gave a little history of Sorin X as well as Richard Sorin, which is Bert's father. And then now Bert is the current president and co-owner of Sorin X. So Bert, the landmine, where does that come from? What's the story behind it?
Yeah, that's interesting because kind of going back to what you're saying about the blob, like we're inventors. Pops and I are inventors, just not by profession, because I guess we get paid for it. But that was like, it's never like we didn't go to adventure school or whatever. We just like making things generally better that's in our surroundings, right? And then, but if you were to tell me, hey, you need to make a better refrigerator, I will never be able to do that. I don't know about it. I don't care about it. I don't think about it. I don't dream about it. Like there's nothing there. But generally, necessity is the mother of invention. So much like the blob, back in the day, I haven't had a chance to listen to the episode, but Pops he had a bent 100-pound York dumbbell that he actually got from, I think it was a local YMCA. They gave them to him because the handles were bent, and one actually broke off, and it just sat in his garage for years. And one day he would always try to move it around. He was like, the freaking thing is just in the way.
Yeah.
And so he would try to pick it up, and after a while, I was like, wow, this is like really, really, really hard to pick up one-handed. So he just tried for years and years, and finally, which to me, that's the craziest part, because prior to that, there was no one that could do it, so it wasn't even a thing. So now I feel like 100 people have done it, now trying it is like not a novel task anymore, whereas like, oh yeah, that was just that thing in our garage that was in the way.
Yeah.
And then it became a training device. But so to kind of segue to the landmine, so 1999, I had just graduated from the University of South Carolina as a hammer thrower. And I decided I come on full time at Sorin X. I decided to compete and attempt to make the Olympic team for the 2000 Olympic team. So I was training that first year out of college unattached. And my regular lifting numbers were good and good enough what I thought to, throw relatively far. But, you're always flipping over every rock trying to find what's that missing link. What's that, you have a 600-pound squat, or you have there's like, okay, so these prerequisites are there, but like my sport is rotational. It's a different skill set than a regular, like, regular lifting. So I was always kind of looking for that little piece. And two athletes were friends of mine, one being Susie Powell, who was also a discus thrower at UCLA. She was the American record holder at the time. And she said, we used to take this bar and shove it in the corner, and we would do all this stuff. And I was like, oh, that's a cool exercise. So I'd play with that. And then Judd Logan, my mentor, one of my mentors, he would do them as well. And a Mexican coach named Nino taught him to him, and he was like, I don't know, we just call him Ninos. And I was like, okay, cool. So
Let's do some
I taught,
Ninos.
right, let's do some Ninos. So one day I walked in and to the gym, and I was like, Pops, like, I want to do this exercise. And then we literally looked around the gym, and in our gym little section where we would do the most training, there was just like crap everywhere. Actually, there was an oxygen tank in the corner because after heavy sets of squats or like big sets, we would sit down and hit oxygen.
That's awesome.
Which is wild. So the oxygen tank was in the corner, so there's nowhere to put the bar. Yeah. And it was just crazy. So Pops and I were sitting there. I was like, I want to be able to do this.
Wait a minute. This gym that you're talking about, was that like the garage gym at your dad's place, or is this at the Sorin facility? No, where is this gym?
Yeah, no, that's good. So this was like this would have been 1999, but we were the same gym called Irmo Sports Gym, and so that was Pops had the Sorin showroom in the Irmo Sports Gym, which that's the gym I grew up in. It was a public gym. Everyone thought Pops owned it, but he didn't because he was like the most like the character of the place, and that was our showroom, blah blah blah. So the back corner, we had all the pump jacks, and we had, powerlifting team was there, and we would have oxygen tanks. I mean, I remember like in 1980s, like random oxygen tanks back there. Anyway, so that's where I would train when I would come home from college, and then when I was professional, I was training out there.
Gotcha.
So I really didn't have a place to put the bar, and it was a metal building, so you would just destroy the wall anyway if you put a bar. And I remember it was like that long. I remember Pops just looking down. He's like, hey, I was like, yeah, I need like something that like pivots. And he's like, oh yeah, take the universal joint off of the spider row, throw a piece of pipe on it, and drop it in the PowerLink platform. And it was like, that was it. Like it was 10 seconds. And I was like, okay, cool. So we went out in the shop, we built it, we dropped it in the PowerLink platform had a socket. Mm-hmm. So we dropped the 2x2 tubing, tightener knob, and that's what I used for the next year. And it was never really intended for like customer consumption. It was just my secret weapon.
That's what I think is the coolest thing about the story is that, I mean, it wasn't like, guys sitting around brainstorming, people thinking, okay, what's the market really need right now? Like, where can we really find our, next product? It was just, like you said, the mother of, invention is necessity, something you needed.
It's so funny. Yeah, because it's so funny. The products that we've had that have had the biggest impact have always been things that literally took about 10 minutes. And it was like, oh, this is super needed. Let's build it. And looking back, and we never looked for the white space, as they say in the industry or anything like that. And so literally I made one, and I started, doing twists, and then I started playing with rotational cleans, and then you started pressing like, oh, this feels cool. There's a stability aspect. And then we would come sideways and do snatches. And we started just playing. We're like, man, this thing is really versatile. Like you could do a lot of stuff on this.
I am very limited as a thrower. I threw in high school.
Okay, yeah, sure.
So, very limited. I didn't throw past high school. But even back, it was in the 90s, so before this was developed. And just thinking about it, I mean, as soon as I got my first landmine years later, I remember thinking to myself, like, oh, this would have been handy. Like, where was this when I was in high school? Like, this would have been awesome.
100%. That was why it was so like, duh, like really? And then like you could load it, but you're not having to hold the load. So like and we just kind of started playing with it every day. And it's like, this thing is really cool. So for the first year or two, it was just an attachment to our platforms. And then a few customers saw it. They go, well, I want one. But if they didn't have our platforms, it was kind of out to lunch. So Pops literally drew on a piece of paper the one that looked like a home base.
Yeah.
And it was so you could shove it in the corner, or you could shove it against something straight. Mm-hmm. And he was like, oh, it's like a home base. And everyone just started calling the home base landmine. And that was the one that everyone had, right? Or copied at least. And so then it kind of gave landmine training to people who didn't already have our gear. Then when we came out with a base camp rack in 2007 or 8, which was like the rig system, that was when we came with 4-way holes. We brought that to the industry, and that kind of retooled the whole industry. The obvious choice was, well, it already has an 1 1/16 inch hole in it. The shaft is 1 inch for the landmine. Well, now you can move the landmine not only laterally but vertically as well. So we started load parameter in different ways, and then just like, well, why have to bolt it on when you could put it anywhere? So like that was kind of the rig system base camp was kind of, I would say, the iPhone of its era because all of a sudden now you can get apps, you can get accessories versus custom pieces. So it kind of, that landmine kind of vein has been in our arsenal for a minute.
It makes sense. I mean, it opened up to almost an a la carte kind of situation where you can just pick and choose and piece together what fits your fitness style, what fits your lifting.
Sure. And it's interesting because I've talked to some people and they go, wow, if you've really got into the fitness community within the last 10 years, you weren't around when that wasn't like the obvious thing. It's like if you're a kid and you grew up with an iPhone, like, oh, we had these things called Nextels prior to that, and so it's funny when I'll go back and see some of our old designs from the 90s or early 2000s, like, holy crap, like, how are we strong? Of course, like, obviously it's hard work, but you just like, it's so limited.
I mean, when I find certain things like the old squat stands, the York squat stands and stuff like that, or even just an old bench that was for home gym use, I know that, like we were saying, you do what you need to do so people would weld much sturdier bench frames and things. But when I find some of the home gym products of a couple decades ago, I think, oh my gosh, like, how did these companies not find themselves under lawsuits left and right? Like, people must have killed themselves.
Well, it was the Wild West in that 80s, early 90s. I mean, you got to remember that was, really no internet per se, so we figured the landmine and almost the base camp rack was prior to YouTube or social media. So that was just a different era. It was a different time of life, which was, interesting in itself, but everything just spread so fast now. I mean, it took years, honestly, to get the landmine as something that people knew what it was, where I wasn't known as, because after a while it was like I was known as the landmine guy. So because I was always demoing the landmine at conference and be like, oh, the landmine guy. And I remember thinking like, wow, that's pretty pigeonholed. Like, it's a product, it's cool, but okay. I guess it's better to be known for something than nothing. But
well, I'm going to send you some business cards now that say that.
The landmine guy, that'd be great.
The landmine guy.
That'd be awesome. But I'm sure people have done a lot better with the landmine than I ever did.
Well, I mean, it's the kind of thing that, like you pointed out, we're in a whole different era where social media and all this kind of stuff. I was just saying on a recent episode, the double-edged sword of it, that it's good sometimes, it's bad sometimes, for various reasons, in terms of your confidence or in terms of education. Sometimes people put stuff out there that's so far off base, but it's so convincing the way it's filmed that I even find myself kind of questioning, wait a minute, am I doing this wrong? And then I'm like, no, I know better. Like, I'm all right.
Yeah, it's weird. It's like the people usually with, not always, I don't mean to offend anyone, but like the best coaches in the world have very few followers. Yeah. Now, there's a few that like really are crushing it and doing a great job, but like the real Yodas are like, they're like, Insta what? Like, what are you talking about? I'm coaching athletes. And you're like, oh yeah, I forgot. Like, you don't care about all this.
My previous episode to this one is with Zach Emanesh, and he's a well-known coach and just a font of knowledge when it comes to iron history, when it comes to coaching, when it comes to wrestling, you name it.
Sure.
And I mean, he's got a sizable following of, I don't even know how many, 30,000, 40,000 followers, probably something like that. But then you click on some 20-year-old that did some goofy deadlift and he's got 100,000 followers, and you're like, what happened here? So, yeah.
It's bonkers. It's
crazy.
It's absolutely bonkers. I mean, I remember Zach Emanesh in 2002, 2003 calling me. I got into the business full-time in 99, so he was one of my first customers. And I remember writing his order handwritten, and I remember like, how do you spell that again? Like, that's a strange last name.
Is there a dash in there?
Yeah, there's a dash, huh? Oh, okay, cool. But there's no, like, I could go look him up online. It was just this guy, Zach, that would call me, and he had this fun last name, and he would send me, like, random pictures of, like, him picking up rocks in the backyard. And we're like, oh, cool. Well, he wouldn't text it because he was like, So, yeah, it's just neat. But I love guys like that are still relevant and still pushing it forward, and they're getting their due because they've paid their dues. And Zach is a wonderful human and great coach.
The thing about him, and we didn't even get to this on the episode, so it's almost like a little follow-up, but the thing I learned about Zach was that he's a man of initiative. He just started calling Louis Simmons at Westside Barbell. He didn't know him. He just called, and then, he mentioned that the lady there would just say, "Hey, Lou, that kid from New Jersey's on the phone."
Yeah, Doris.
So exactly. So then
Yeah.
Doris would just say, "Oh, Zach from New Jersey's calling."
Because to all you
So I
kids
mean,
out
it's the
there,
same
that's how we
thing.
used to do it.
Exactly. So I see it as the same thing with you and with Sorin next with Zach. That he's a man of initiative. He's putting it out there that look what I'm doing, guys. And
Yeah.
it's something that kind of connects all this is that there was a great episode that he put up of. I'm blanking on the name of the series right now that he had on his YouTube channel, Zach Evanesh. But he was interviewing your father, and your father told a great story about Andy Jackson.
Yeah.
And about seeing as a child Andy Jackson and visiting Andy Jackson's house where he produced a lot of his plates and a lot of his equipment and seeing him actually work and do his thing. And he talked about like all kinds of stuff, the coal chute and the plates coming in and out and stuff.
Yeah.
And it made me think of you because you grew up in a whole different era than your father. The climate of things had changed in terms of lifting. And, by the time you were getting into it, powerlifting had been much more established as a sport, and by that time Jackson Barbell had stopped producing as much. So when you were growing up, what was the start? Did you just see your dad working out, so then you started working out? I mean, was it that simple, or what kind of got you in the gym?
Yeah, well, my mom and dad got divorced when I was a kid, and I lived with my mom. So then I would go and visit my dad, visitation, blah, blah, blah. So when I'd go there, he's lifted 4 days a week for 50 something years. I mean, if I was over at his house and it was 5 o'clock, you're lifting. That's what's happening in the garage, right? And
some kids have dinner time,
Oh no, it was like
at your house. It was just a normal part of life.
Coming over, yeah. I mean, he had a whole group of dudes that would come over, and he was kind of the ringleader, and they'd get it, and you learn all that trash talk and that little edging each other, and you're doing the whole thing, and so you kind of learn that culture. And I'm a little 7-8-year-old kid hanging out, and then you start playing with pinch gripping plates, and you start playing with little stuff, and you're watching these strong men with camaraderie and do hard stuff and cheering for each other and all that stuff. So that's what I got to grow up to. And and the other side of it, you're talking that was the mid '80s. So that was the high water mark of the action hero WWE. If you've seen the bigger, stronger, bigger, faster, stronger, or bigger, stronger, faster, whatever Chris movie is. The bells, right? And so that we're the same age. So that's what I grew up with. Nikita Koloff was my favorite, and Pops' favorite too. And it was interesting. Of course, I liked him because Pops liked him, but we liked him because he was the most athletically powerful looking one, not the most bodybuildery whatever. You saw him and he was just yoked traps and big shoulders and a back that kind of came in. He looked like Pizarenko, right, at the time. He looked just like it. And so remember, that was because Pizarenko, strangely enough, that was a name I knew at 8 years old. I knew who Alexiev was. I remember I had a picture of me in second or third grade, 1985, 86, wearing a Lico Homstad shirt to school. That people are what's that weird word?
One of the things I was going to ask you is, I'm sure you had friends growing up, but how often did you have to explain things like that? Because even my children, it's funny, the mind of a child and the mindset of a child is that their world is the world everyone must live in sometimes. And so even just blobs, to bring up something that my children are used to, I'm working on blob training, and it's a goal of mine to lift a fat man. So I'm working on it now, and they see me lifting blobs, and they'll go try to lift up. I have a 12-pound shot put, and they'll try to mess around with it two-handed and stuff. And, one of my kids said, oh, I wonder if so-and-so, and said someone from school has ever lifted a blob. And I was like, I can almost guarantee they never have. This is not a mainstream sport.
Yeah, they will have zero idea what you're talking about.
Let's just start with a home gym. Ask your friend if they have a gym at home, and then if they say no, the answer is no to any of these things that your dad does. So it made me think of you that, you're doing all these things. Did you have to always explain this to your friends?
It was all the stuff I was into wasn't cool until I was 23.
It finally paid off.
Seriously, no, it really did. That's kind of jokingly, 1999, I'm 22 years old, graduating from college, getting into the like, the industry per se. And that was right when human performance, like to the more commercial level, was starting to peak. So I kind of got thrown out onto the highway of it with like 10 years of experience. And like, as a kid, I knew who Bill Kazmaier and Dave Waddington and like, I knew who all those people were. Like I actually met them,
Yeah.
I mean, John Brookfield used to come over to the gym. And I took the original. If you ever saw the picture of John Brookfield and my dad together, I took that picture and I was like 9 yeyears old. He hands me the camera. I'm just like, So I was there when John and my dad met. When my dad showed John his first number 3 gripper and showed him the blobs, and then John showed him a couple things, and you're seeing these two guys that were doing a thing that no one was doing.
Yeah.
Trying to meet each other and go, oh, you're weird like I am. And I was just sitting there going, this is cool. And, then they started talking about Herman Gorner. And that was Pops's kind of his guy, because he'd found these old books about Gorner, and no one in the 80s was talking about lifting axles. And that was like, you've got to be kidding me. But I remember talking to Pops, I was like, what was the hardest lift you ever did? And I think he bet his best friend a trip to Charleston, like a party weekend. And it was a 550, 2 fingers and a thumb, double overhand, 2-inch axle deadlift off a 4-inch block. Yeah, off a 4-inch deficit. And Dad's like, that was the hardest thing I ever did in my entire life. I thought my fingers were going to pop off. And I was like, did you do it? He's like, yeah, and it was a great weekend. It was like, that was the 80s. Like, we're like, you would literally lift weights to go party, But and I'm thinking, like, now I'm going, who was doing random weird feats of strength, like doing a blob in their garage when there was no blob. There was the first Iron Man gripper, the first number 3 gripper. He closed before it was known as an Iron Mind gripper.
Yeah,
it was
Captains
just
of Crush.
There was no Captains of Crush.
Yeah, exactly. It
like,
wasn't
it
COC.
was just. It wasn't. There was no COC. It was thought to be an impossible thing. So Warren Tedding made the grippers. Randy Strossen sent one to Pops. Pops called him back, said, I closed it. He goes, there's no way you closed it. He goes, yeah, I did. And he goes, well, I'm going to, and he painted one and sent it to him and said, take a picture so I know it's the same one. It was red. And I remember like taking a picture, like, okay, cool, whatever, Pops, like neat, but you look back and that was like in the late 80s. He wasn't certified until the early 90s because there was no certification. There was no nothing.
And I remember reading that was an achievement because the certification later was a little different than the way he originally closed it. And I forget off the top of my head the difference. But
yeah, so here's what it was. It used to be you just put it in your hand, close it, right? Mm-hmm. And then I think 2001 through 3, 4, somewhere in there, they had what they call a credit card close.
There you go.
That's so you held like a credit card, and you like it had to pass through the gripper handle to keep people from crushing it down.
Yeah, whenever they set it to keep them from setting it too close, that kind of thing.
Setting it too deep. So at one point, it was pretty cool. He was the first person to ever COC. He was the oldest and he was the last. So when he recertified at 57, he was the first, the last, and the oldest ever to do a number 3.
That's a cool achievement.
Yeah, it's pretty cool. But I saw him doing some wild things. Like I saw him do a two finger close of the old COCs, 91, 92. Like,
so where is all this stuff? I was just gonna say, is it right over here?
Oh, we have a 2,000 square foot museum. You got to come down and check it out.
The museum is amazing. I've seen pictures. I've seen tours of it. Zach has a video, for example. I've seen it, and it's on my summer plans this summer to drive down for a weekend. I'm not too far off.
Come down to Summer Strong and check it out. Like, it's kind of funny. I laugh. I said, now, thankfully, because of gentlemen like yourself that are actually bringing education to it, I've laughed. I was like, man, I've been moving this crap around since I was a kid.
That's on my list, actually, of things to ask. Yeah. So when it comes to vintage weights, when it comes to pieces of things that aren't just something that necessarily your father lifted, like the first Fat Man blob or something like that, but just in general, a rare plate, what's now considered rare, that Sorin has in the museum, previous to that, prior to that, I guess I should say, not previous, prior to that, before there was a museum, were you involved in, getting this stuff, or were you, what was your connection to any of that? Do you have any, things that you personally liked or that
Yeah, that's cool.
you were into?
I mean, Pops has been lifting on York deep dish plates since the 90s. And I remember almost every time he would lift on them, he would just, after the set, he'd rack it and he would just kind of go to himself. He goes, I love that sound. Like, everyone else in the gym would use the standards because that was in the 80s. But, like, we had one rack in the deep dishes, and some of them are 47.5 pounds. I mean, they're all over the place. But they just have a different ring to them. So I grew up hearing that sound, and I didn't realize. He would always tell me how cool they were. He's like, no, those are cool. He's like, never sell those. Don't ever get rid of them. He's like, those are going to be worth something one day. And I'm like, all right, you got 8 million of them. I move them around every time we have to move, whatever. And so you kind of get it, and you kind of see the style and like the panache to them. And then, he would explain to me, hey, when they just started powerlifting, they couldn't get enough plates on the bar, so the deep dish went away. And so there was some kind of coolness effect to it. And then in his office, he would just have like stuff everywhere. It was like walking into a mad scientist lair. There would just be all these wild collections of things because he's just always loved it. So he bought most of the stuff. Well, he's had still some of the same weights he's had since he was 15 years old. Some of the original.
Yeah, I heard him mention a Jackson barbell he always uses. I heard him mention various things that he's like, yeah.
Oh yeah, I mean he has the original Jacksons, some of the original stuff that he had in high school and college. He has the original. It's a red wooden display rack from Jackson Barbell that was actually gifted to us, and that was the display rack that he called it the dream rack. He would walk up when he was a kid, when his dad would take him to Jackson, he said all the display barbells were on that rack. And he's like, this was what made me want to be in this industry. He's like, I would just look at this stuff and go, like, look at the craftsmanship and the workman, and just, he was like, I just dreamt one day of having one of those bars on here. So it's pretty wild that 60 years later, the rack is sitting 20 feet that way.
Now you've got the whole rack. Yeah. Nice.
Now the whole rack, and I would think we probably have the largest Jackson collection in the world, I would think.
Well, I mean, there's just so many things that whenever I'm researching them, sometimes come back to you guys. And you even reached out to me one time. I'd posted about Mark Henry lifting the inch and putting it overhead, and you're like, oh, I think that's in my office. And
there. Yeah, it was in my office for years.
Exactly.
June something 2002. Yeah, he was the first to clean and press it.
Exactly.
Pops was there. It was the old time a barbell strongman dinner. And then I don't know if you saw the video, maybe you have. He did that, and then he picked it up left-handed, remember, and brought it across the room and laid it on the table.
Which
it's just like
he's
bonkers.
a showman.
And I believe he was naturally probably the strongest person to walk the planet within a few generations.
I have no argument with you on that. I find Mark Henry to be just baffling. I mean, he's so impressive in all the things that he's done in multiple different disciplines. When I say he's a showman, I don't just mean his career with professional wrestling. I just mean in the old time strongman style of things. That, when I saw that video of him at that dinner doing that, I mean, you've got just kind of everyday looking people here and there sitting at their tables. And out he comes, and he puts it overhead, and then he sets it on the table with his other hand, and I'm like, oh my gosh, that's like such a cool, like he easily could have been in the early 1900s or something, like an old-time strongman.
Right. Well, obviously, his mentor and why,
Oh, yeah, Terry Todd.
Terry and Jan, I mean, they, and unfortunately, Terry's gone now, but I used to spend a lot of time with Terry. I consider him kind of a granddad, and so we would either email or sit on the phone for hours, and he would just tell me stories and this and that. And I could only imagine how much Mark has heard over the years. I would only see Terry a few days a year, but like Mark, they were, he was their parents. Mark was their kid. So all that he learned and just understood the weight behind things. And that's where I think I had an advantage, or I don't say advantage, but I appreciate guys like my dad and Brookfield and Steve Jack and Mark and Terry and Jan. It's like just building weight behind what this stuff means and why. Like it's not just a heavy weight. It's not just a chunk of metal. You know, this is a set of squat stands that Bob Bednarski missed a 525 jerk and dropped it, and that tore the steel right there. But then those same racks were used for the next 2 decades in the first World Powerlifting Championships. You're like,
it's wild.
That's just crazy. Like as I get older, the more I realize like those are just artifacts of part of our, you know, our sport, and that's what we love.
And I mean, I love connecting the dots and seeing the story of it, and that's why I love, you know, lifting with older stuff. And I mean, I have plenty of modern stuff in my home gym, but I love the vintage weights because I love something that maybe, you know, is seen as less valuable or something like that by collectors. If it has a good story, well, it's valuable to me. It could be just run of the mill to anyone walking down the street, but if this has a good story behind it, you got me. I'm in. Yeah. So, I mean, when you talk about this stuff, you're a gentleman running a company that's making power racks who, as a child, spoke to Terry Todd, who broke Bob Peoples' record, who built arguably the first power rack in a dirt basement root cellar.
Yeah, I saw that power rack.
You know, just connecting the dots between those things, it's like, oh, look at this cool historical lineage going on, just from that perspective.
It's crazy. Yeah, I feel so blessed to have, like, just those greats, and just like, wow, I was born at a time and at a place where those things were semi-accessible that I didn't really realize how accessible they truly were, you know, and again, like at 9 years old, knowing who Herman Gorner was, like that's just. And I remember I would wear my Rico Halmstad shirt to school, and my friends would make fun of it. They call it Elfo hamstring because they didn't know how to pronounce it. They're like, "Oh, you're wearing your Elfo hamstring shirt." I'm like, "Yeah, man, these are the best weights in the world." They're like, "Yeah, anyway, you know." And then and I would come to school, I'd be pumped up, and I'm like, hey, I was like, I did a new personal record. They had no idea what that was, and then I was like, no, but I deadlifted, and they don't know what a deadlift is because it's literally, 1987, and kids are little. And so they know like curls, and their dad does bench press on the DP thing and the thing. And so I'm like, no, I deadlifted.
Like the little shiny chrome tubing. Yeah.
Yeah. And I'm like, I finally got 132. And they're like, you're lying. There's no way there's 132. I'm like, no, it is, because it was 60 kilos. Like, because it was kilo. I didn't know. I just knew how to add those, And then so I remember even through high school, people were like, well, how much you lift? I was like, I don't know. I think 177 or whatever it was. And people were like, you're making that up. I'm like, okay. All right, sure. So you
whatever.
It's just the thing. It was a very unique way to grow up that panned out.
Well, I mean, when you're talking about the greats, I'd be remiss if I didn't bring up Sly Stallone. So, Sylvester Stallone. He's not known exactly for being a competitive weightlifter, but I know he means a lot to you, and he fits in with what you were saying before about, this is the time of the 80s and into the 90s where, these guys in the movies look like He-Man. They did cool things. He was Rambo. He was all these different things.
Yeah.
So, did you just like Sylvester Stallone in the movies?
100%.
And then, the follow-up question to it is, when you met him, was that the top of the list in terms of meeting people at that time? Because you mentioned all these people you may have met. Just today, you commented on one of my posts. I posted some Dan Lurie plates, and you said, "Oh, I met him," and it's like, "Oh my gosh, I can't believe he met him. He met Dan." So
and the thing is, at the time, I really didn't know who Dan was. We were at an old-time barbell strongman dinner. Pop's like, "Oh, Dan Lurie." I was like, "Oh, cool." And he had like a little booth with some Dan Lurie stuff, and so we went over and talked to him. And
awesome.
those events were so neat in the early 2000s because it was really like the first class of old-time strongmen, that were there. Met Adam's son, the mighty Adam. Met his son, hung out with him. Slim the Hammerman, I had dinner with him multiple times. He told me something one day. It was awesome. We were talking about just, strain and struggle and this and that, like just competing and we were sitting there talking and I kind of think how he put it, and he was like, that pain, he was talking why a lot of people couldn't do what he could do. And he goes, that pain when you're like struggling and straining, you think every part of your body is going to just burst and tendons are going to pop off and like you're going to die. He's like, the best people could go there. And I was like, yeah. And he looks at me and goes, I could live there. And I was just like,
Yeah.
And I'm like a
Okay,
22-year-old hammer thrower. And I'm like, I still got chills right now. And he just got right. And he just looked at me like 70-something-year-old man. He just looked at me and goes, I could live there. And I was just like, check, please. We're good, man.
Yeah.
So like,
I'm just trying to make it to the Olympics here.
Yeah, man. I'm just trying to throw this stupid ball, man. But I'm terrified right now.
That's amazing.
So like, yeah, Pops was always, bringing me to stuff like, it's like, we got to go to this thing. I'm like, okay, cool. I'll hang out with you. And I look back now, I'm like, and unfortunately, a lot of those gentlemen are gone, and so, going back to what you were saying, so I had the opportunity to meet Stallone 10 or 12 years ago at the Arnold when he got his Lifetime Achievement Award. We were helping we used to do the equipment for the strongman at the Arnold, so we were like backstage and stuff like that. I was like, oh my gosh, this is, Stallone, this is super cool. So of course I just like nerdily like, hey, how's it going? Shook his hand. But probably 2 years ago, about a year and a half, 2 years ago, so a friend of mine, Gunnar Peterson, trains Stallone and has since the 90s, maybe 80s, who knows. And we were doing we're playing with this documentary we're doing, and so I talked to Gunnar and I was like, hey, do you think you would Sly sit down with me? He's like, hey, he's coming in the gym tomorrow, 9 o'clock. Be here early. I can't promise anything. I'll breach the subject. Maybe he'll say hi. Maybe he'll hang out. Maybe nothing. And I'd met him probably 2 or 3 years before at Gunner's, and we got into this like probably 15-minute discussion about old time strong men and cool. boxers and all this stuff. And he was wildly educated at it, and like unbelievably so. Which is why he's a great playwright. Like, I mean, he could write movies, direct, like he knows what he's talking about. And so, so anyway, I'd met him a couple times. I thought it was super awesome. But I'm thinking
I knew that you loved him, so I wanted to ask you about meeting him, because I find it interesting to ask people about who they really may have, like you said, like, oh, hi, nice to meet you. Who really set them back? Like I asked Ed Cohen, like, well, what was it like when you met Franco Colombo? You looked up to him. Right. What was that like? Because it's cool to hear the GOAT talk about meeting someone he admired. So it's cool to hear you talk about meeting Sylvester Stallone. And I know there's a connection.
So real quick, so we were talking. Here's the thing. So we were talking, and so finally he comes in. He's like, "Yeah, you want me to talk with you?" And we had cameras set up, the whole deal. I've never played this stuff. And he's like, "Yeah, I'll talk to you for a minute." I'm like, "Oh my gosh, this is awesome." He sits down with me for 45 minutes, does a podcast. And I'm like losing my crap, So we got talking about, I mean, we're talking about where the ideas for Rambo and Rocky and what were the meta themes and what were the underlying themes and strength and conditioning and physical culture, like all the stuff you could talk about in 45 minutes,
Yeah.
And then I asked him, I said, what made you want to strength train? And he talked about it, and he kind of sat back. He goes, when I was 9 years old, Hercules Unchained was in the matinee theater. And he goes, I went to the movie by myself. And he goes, and when Steve Reeves hit that pose where he's like this, he goes, and it was funny. You could see him like getting into the character, like just thinking about it. He goes, it was like he stood there for 4 minutes. He goes, it was just burned into my mind. He goes, it was burned in like the masculinity, the muscles, the confidence, like all the stuff I wanted as a kid. He goes, this guy had it. And he goes, and then the scene ended, and he later laughed. He goes, that scene was probably about a second and a half long, but he goes, it was burned in.
It meant that much.
He said, I left the theater, and I was walking home, and I walked past a junkyard, and I started picking up heavy stuff in the junkyard because I knew I wanted muscles. Now, whether that's the actual truth, it's a great story, right?
Heck yeah.
And so we were talking, and I kind of laughed, and I said, here's an interesting story. I said, I was 9 years old. Rambo First Blood Part 2 came out. My dad took me to the theater. You walked out on screen, shirt off, scars across the back, super yoked. Same exact scenario happened to me. And I said, we left the theater. My father drove me straight to Jeffrey Archery. I bought my first bow that day. We got my first bow that day that I still have. I said, in fact, downstairs in my truck, I have my bow with me. I'm 45 years old. I'm still carrying a bow and I'm lifting weights. And he actually teared up. And I said, you are my Steve Reeves.
That's
and
awesome.
He was just like, wow.
Yeah.
And we had this moment. We kind of looked at each other like, huh, we're kind of passing the torch right now. This is awesome. And
how many times does he get interviewed?
Amazing.
You know? And so, but he doesn't probably hear something that personal, that meaningful
Right.
and genuine from the person interviewing him.
Well, that's what he told me. He's like, man, this was a lot of fun. Like, wow. Because I wasn't like giving him the normal. I was like, hey, man, you changed my life significantly because this is the path that I later took because of you and others like you. But that was that age where it was just like, you know, capable, confident, out thinking, out toughing, out, you know, all out everything, all these insurmountable odds. And I was like, yeah, you know, I believed it, you know, and so it was neat. So I treasure that experience. You know, how often do you get to tell one of your heroes why?
Yeah.
You know,
Yeah.
and honor them in that way. Like, hey, man, now you get to have this. Not that he gives a shit.
Well, sometimes people say the opposite, like don't meet your heroes. You don't want to know the truth. So it's just cool to hear a story of a scenario where it worked out, where he lived up to where you held him in esteem, you know?
It really did. It was a surreal moment. It was like, wow, this just kind of came full circle. And then another time I was with Terry and Jan Todd at the Stark Center, and it was kind of cool because Arnold came there for the grand opening of it. Yeah. And he was in the if you ever get a chance, go down to the Stark Center down in Austin. So he was in the one room, and I was kind of like looking around at some of the pictures, like it was a Remington picture I was checking out. And Arnold is in a suit. He was still the governor at that time. He was a suit and with cowboy boots. And he goes, where's a picture of Randy Matson in here? And no one said anything, but I was a thrower, so I knew who Randy Matson was. And I kind of laughed. And he looked across the room. He goes, you know of this man? And I kind of laughed. I go, yeah, I know exactly who that is. I said, 22-meter thrower. I think he was at Texas A&M. I said, he wasn't at Texas. He was Texas A&M. And he was like, you really know who that is? And I said, absolutely. And Arnold and I had this like 1v1 5-minute conversation about throwing. And he told me about when I was a kid, I would read of this man named Randy Matson, and he could throw 22 meters, and I could only throw 11 meters. And he became a kid again, and told me about the javelin and this and that. And he lived out his life as before Arnold. And he was asking what I did. I'm a hammer thrower, and he's asking how I was throwing. And he goes, I was a glider, but then I went into, he goes, these other men started spinning, and he tried to do a spin in cowboy boots in a suit in the museum. And I'm like, I'm losing my crap.
Right in front of you, Arnold's about to do a thrower spin.
I'm like, this is the coolest. And Jan Todd's looking across the room at me going like, what is going on? And one of the guys like, Arnold, we got to go. He goes, okay. If you listen, he goes, we'll talk later. And he walked off, and Jan walked. I mean, she goes, that was incredible. I was like, please tell me you got that on video, because that was like the coolest thing. And of course, no one did.
Oh my gosh.
Yeah,
I mean,
so I got to be both of my heroes at that time.
Since I threw a little bit in high school, I know what you're talking about. But for anyone who doesn't, throwers start with their back to the field, and basically you hit the middle and then rotate, and you're building momentum. And
sure,
I'm probably saying this in a very crude term. You probably know much more advanced way to describe this. But if you can just imagine Arnold in cowboy boots and a suit doing this movement, oh my gosh, that is
around $1 million paintings. It
exactly,
was
in the middle of a museum.
Like, you've got to be kidding me! What is occurring right now?
Oh,
it was what I would kill to have that on video. One guy said he had it on video, was going to send it to me, but that's 12 years ago. He probably, hey, if you're watching this and you still have that on your phone, go ahead and send me that.
Yeah, please. We need
that
this.
would be great.
This,
be really cool.
For posterity's sake, we'll put it in the Sorin Next Museum. It'll just play on a TV. As far as Stallone, I mean, right away when I started looking into your life, and I was like, oh, he loves Stallone. Well, that makes sense. You're really into bow hunting. I'm like, there you go. You probably watched Rambo. But I mean, did you hunt with your father as a child as well? Is that where that all, so it all came
my
together?
dad started that. You know, he's basically, our life has been like kind of somewhat revolved around the outdoors and strength. Like those are the two things that, regardless of anything else, are going to get a lot of attention. And that's just kind of whether that's just in me or that's been bred into me, whatever into me. Like that's most of my activities involve around those two things. So.
Well, I mean, I see some distinct differences with hunting and lifting that, and strength that,
Right.
the endurance of hunting. And I'm not a hunter myself, at least an experienced hunter, but just the endurance of it. When I listen to
Sure.
Cameron Haynes, when I listen to, some of the things that you've told stories about, I think, oh my gosh, like this is an endurance sport. But where do you see parallels to lifting and powerlifting or any
Sure.
other discipline with
Yeah,
bow
that's a good question. I mean, I think they have besides the energy system thing is obviously that's obvious. I've had to use my maximal strength very few times hunting, but that being said, the similarities are delayed gratification. Like to throw something far or to lift something heavy, it's who could do it the longest generally. Like who doesn't lose interest. I'm a pretty good archer. I'm a pretty successful hunter because I've done it for 30 something years, and kind of the same with lifting. And so one of my strengths are generally, if I like something, I'm going to just do it for a long time. And I realize eventually I'll get pretty good at it. And 10 to 20 to 30 years later, I'm pretty good at it. And so that's where those similarities are really there. It's just like, oh, I don't care. I'll go out and shoot my bow 50 times today, even if I suck, because I remember the first 5 million times I tried to clean and it sucked. So I know I'll eventually get better at it. But then the contrast of it is like, it's, the energy system of like an emotional state. Like, lifting, I would get amped, and then hunting, I have to like amp myself down. So it's like, that's the kind of nice.
I didn't think of that. That's interesting. Yeah.
Yeah. The medicinal characteristic of that is nice. It's the yin to the yang. Like I get to kind of be down because I think if you run that hot so much in that sympathetic nervous system, you just burn out. So I found even when I was throwing and training, if I went fishing or hunting often, I would put in my journals, my performances would increase as long as I was still getting sleep. And my theory at the time was I was doing something that was non-training related. I was down regulating. I was increasing my dopamine. I was decreasing my catabolic stress. And so it was like, okay, this was working. I threw far the weeks that I went fishing.
Yeah.
And it's interesting.
It worked in
Yeah,
tandem.
so it was like the back and forth. But then there's also the times when, let's say, hunting or fishing, something crazy happens, there's an adrenaline spike. So you get to kind of taste both sides of it. And I was talking to Ryan Krauser. I don't know if you know Ryan. He's the world record holding the shot put right now. I threw 76.8 or something ridiculous. And he and I were talking last night about training, and he was training his hunting dog while we were on the phone. And so like I'm thinking like, wow, you're the best shot putter that's ever lived.
Yeah.
And we haven't talked about throwing at all. You're talking about training your hunting dog and bow hunting. And I'm like, oh right, because you have what is the samurai? You have to have the gardener side of that too. Like
Absolutely.
There has to be that balance. And I think there's so many athletes or lifters that all they do is that, and they burn themselves out. They're strong as crap for 6 years until it's the high speed coming part. Everything flies off. So it's interesting. I find it cool to people who have that balance in their life. Their compare and contrast period there. Those are honestly more interesting people to talk to as well. Because I can't talk about squats for the next year.
I don't think I'd want to. So we'll save it for Squattober. So
yeah, exactly.
When it comes to someone I mentioned, Cameron Haynes, I noticed Sorin has his barbell, signature barbells.
Sure.
You're just friends with him, and he lifts, so it all came together. What's the story behind those?
Yeah, so Cameron is one of our athletes, like one of our sponsored athletes, and we had some mutual friends. Kip Falks, who was a co-founder of Under Armour, introduced us, and Kip's a hunting buddy of mine. He's Cam's hunting partner. We got talking, so we worked a deal. and I like what he does and the way he goes about things. He goes about it unapologetically. He goes at it hard, and I think Cam has a similar messaging that I've lived my life by. Like, he just did it. He didn't start good. He just did it for a long frickin' time.
Yeah.
And eventually he's really good, you know? And so that you look at it and you're like, wow, it's simple. What, as Dan John would say, it's simple, not easy. You know, it's like, okay, that's a cool thing. So I like that. I like his his non-relenting. I've gone and I've run and lifted with Cam, and you say, like, you know, don't meet your heroes. There's very few people that live up to the legend.
Yeah.
Cam lives up to the legend.
That's
like,
cool.
I've shot with him, and I would say I'm a better than average shot. I'm not great, and Cam is certainly better than I am at shooting, and most people aren't. Like, I'm pretty good at archery. You have to be good to, like, spank me.
Yeah.
And, like, he's better than I am. It was just like, okay, so we thought you were good. You are. And we went running, and it was like a child trying to chase a cheetah, basically. You know, so we did Mount Pisgah. It was horrible. And again, my energy system training is not, I'm trying to get into there, but, like, he ran up Pisgah, came a third of the way back down, and I'm like, you know, tasting battery acid, walking up the hill, and he walks up and he's like, hey man, I'll just walk with you up the hill. And then every once in a while he's like, okay, let's start running again. I'm like, I'm gonna die if we go up any faster.
Yeah, this is.
And then I remember him looking at me. He goes, you asked me why I do this every day at lunch, and I was like, yeah. He goes, if we rounded this corner right now and the bull of a lifetime was at 70 yards, could you make that shot 100% of the time? And I was like, no. He goes, that's why I do this every day.
Yeah.
And I'm like, okay, so you'll do the hard work. So not only can you shoot extremely well, you're a beast running. And then, you know, like, we went back and lifted. Like, he doesn't deadlift a lot or squat a lot, like that stuff. But, you know, he benched 225 for 12 or 15 reps at 158 pounds or whatever he is. And we were bear hunting.
That's much better than the average guy walking down the street. That's for sure.
Right. I mean, like, okay, you're like NFL level strength.
Yeah, exactly.
You know, that's strong, you know.
But I mean, to reference what you said before about meeting gentlemen and him saying that, you know, I live there. Well, that's the moment he lives in. He lives in that moment to make that shot, you know.
He does, and he'll put in all of his chips. And still, he was strong as we were bear hunting 4 or 5 years ago, and we needed to get a bear out of the woods. And he joked with me. He was like, hey, squat down and grab that bear and take it out. And I was like, and I was the strongest weight room guy there. And I was like, yeah, I ain't doing that. And so we sat there for a minute. And then he was like, hey, if I get down, can y'all put it on my shoulders? I'm thinking, this ain't happening. Yeah. Like, you ain't standing up with this thing. And 4 of us picked this bear up and put it on his shoulders. And he booked it through the woods. And I swear to you, people are like, no, and I was like, that bear was 300 plus pounds. They're like, no, it wasn't. I go, listen, I helped lift it. It was heavy as crap. And I was running in front of him, smashing trees down to give him a path. And he carried it probably 100 yards in two like carries. And I'm like, okay, you're legit. You're super legit. Like, nothing, no doubt. So.
I love strongman lifts and odd objects, and it doesn't get much more odd than lifting a 300-pound bear and running with it.
And
so
running through the woods,
that's pretty badass, if you ask me.
Yeah, he's a whole different animal, man. Like, I love seeing that excellence, and, you know, people that are just about it, right? I mean, there's so many cool strongmen out there and women that are just, you know, they're living it, you know.
Well,
cool.
I mean, what stuck out to me, though, when I saw those barbells was that, I don't know, maybe there is another company out there that has a sponsored athlete that's a hunter, but I'm pretty sure Sorin is the only one. You don't see that too often. So it's just, I think it's kind of cool, you know, that you have a hunter as a sponsored athlete.
Yeah, well, thanks. I mean, he's an athlete. There's not a ball involved or a goal, but,
exactly.
You know, I would honestly, he and I were talking, and he was like, you know, anybody could do it day 1 through 3. Day 7, day 8, when you wake up in the mountains and you're tired and you're hungry and your feet hurt and your back hurt, and where it's like, who springs out of bed before daylight at that point to go hunt again? Yeah. And I did an elk hunt this past year, and one day at 7,000 feet elevation, carrying a pack and walking over deadfall, I personally walked 17 and a half miles. For me, that was just stupid. Like,
Yeah.
I was so screwed up. My feet
That's
were
uneven
killing me.
terrain. It's not like you're going for
Oh,
a
like
17
stepping
mile
over
walk.
logs, like the whole
Yeah.
thing, brush busting. It's just like, and I've never walked that far. And that was on day 3 of 5. And I remember I got back, I did my pulse oximeter because I just wanted to know, like, oh, I'm at elevation. Like, what are my biometrics? I just want to
Yeah.
know, like, how fast can I accommodate to this? And I was laying in bed, and I think my pulse was 91 resting heart rate at laying in bed at 11 o'clock at night, and my pulse oximeter had gone from 97 down to right at 90. And they said they put you on oxygen at 91 in a hospital.
Jeez. So you're
And
right
I'm
there.
looking, I'm like, this is bad. Like, I'm thinking, like, I'm dying right now, And I remember thinking, I was like, there's dudes that are they're going to spring out of bed and go do this tomorrow again. But the interesting part was by the end of the week, my accommodation started happening. My pulse oximeter started climbing back up. My resting heart rate started dropping. And then I got back home and my resting dropped over 10%. Like, so that's the sciencey, nerdy stuff that I thought was cool. Like, okay, if I'm training for this is great. But guys like that, they have a different level.
For sure. I mean, I'm a veteran, and the first, I guess, 2/3 of my career, I was in life support and survival. And so I had to train air crew on how to survive occasionally and stuff like that. I mainly took care of the equipment. But the ladies and gentlemen that trained me when I'd go to survival school were like that. Like, I'd be hoofing it and struggling and huffing and puffing and finally make it to a point that I was supposed to make it to. And yeah, the SEER instructor would be like sitting there eating a peanut butter sandwich, not even sweating. And I'm like, what just happened? I even in my head was coming up with like conspiracy theories, like maybe another instructor picked him up or something. I don't know.
Yeah,
like,
how does this even work?
How is this human being doing these things? So, if you have that training, you have that passion, you take that to the next level. And I could see that with him. So it makes sense to me to be a sponsored athlete. But in terms of passion and taking things to the next level, you mentioned your throwing career. After that, you got into the Highland Games. And, I heard you tell a story about someone commenting to you that, like, you'd be pretty good if you tried. So, taking it to the next level with the Highland Games and really trying and getting into it. I did a couple episodes with a buddy of mine, Kurt, from the Kurt Locker, about the history of strongmen, but we didn't get too heavy into the Highland Games. So I wanted to ask you, when you were getting into the Highland Games, did you know the history of it at all? Because I know throughout your life, you'd been educated by your father or elsewhere.
Yeah. I honestly knew the history of it more than I knew the today of it, if that makes sense. Like, I knew who Donald Denny was, but I'd never seen Highland Games in person, which is odd. So I'd read we have every Iron Mind Milo magazine since the inception of it. So I'd always read and I'd see Ryan Vieira and all these guys and Matt Sanford and, Kazmaier and all this.
Yeah.
Like, I'd seen pictures, but I'd never actually seen it in real life until I did my first Highland Games, which strangely enough it was the Wednesday after 9/11. So 9/11 was on a Wednesday or Tuesday or Wednesday. Was that right? Tuesday, and Saturday was my first Highland Games so I competed in the first athletic event after 9/11 in America, which was the Charleston Highland Games. So that was my first one, and I remember just like I was a thrower. I want to go do other throwing things. I get to wear a kilt. This is going to be great.
It's a good time.
It's a good time, right? So that was. I mean, I always had that history of strength, so I knew that side of it, but I didn't know anything when I showed up. I knew I would probably be pretty good at the hammer because that's what I did for a living. Everything else, man, I don't know.
Well, I don't want to put you on the spot, but can you give a little history of the Highland Games or of any of your favorite parts of it?
Yeah, so I mean, the history of the Highland Games, or at least what I researched and they had said were, when England was giving Scotland a little bit of a run for their money, kind of getting on them a bit, they were very oppressive. And so they didn't want the Scottish training for war or anything like that. So the Scottish would basically train to stay battle ready, per se. One of the reasons they would take their agrarian weights and hammers and things, because their hammers were a spear, because they could hit them on either side on, like a sledgehammer.
Yeah.
So they take their weights, like a 56-pound weight or 28-pound weight. That was their scale weights. So they would use those for training if they ever wanted to stay battle ready, but then also it became their sport. And so they had what they call a clacknart, which is known as the stone of strength. And so each family would have their own stone, if you remember from Braveheart. So they had their stone, and they would go to events, and all the men would throw the clacknart, and whoever threw the stone the furthest would kind of be known as the man of the house or the man of the clan, you know. Another interesting portion of that, if you ever heard of a cairn or a cairn, I think they call it. So if you look in these small towns in Scotland and some other ones, they'll have these giant piles of rocks right outside, right when you get to town. You know the story there. And so when they would go off to war, the men would go off to war. They would take their stone, their family stone, and they'd put it on the pile on their way out. And they were putting up their own monument for their life, because if they came home, they'd pick their stone up and go home. And if they hadn't, they were literally putting their stone on their last resting place that was like, I was here. And then, so if you went by a town that had a large pile, that meant they got decimated. Yeah. And, you know, so it was like, that always just gave me chills. Stuff. Heavy. And so when you start seeing or if you ever read, the book of Stones and Strength by Steve Jack. And
I haven't, but I will.
it's a great book. And actually I took that book with me the first time to Scotland when I went and lifted the Enver Stone and the Denny Stones and things like that. And, you know, that was again 2007. So a little harder to find things back then. And we literally drove around using a 15-year-old book of how to find stones in Scotland, and it was pretty cool. So that, I just love the history. I love the weightiness to the culture of it. And so I got to compete in Scotland at the Newtonmore Highland Games, USA versus Scottish team. So US, we went over there, and I remember they handed me this hammer. I was like, oh man, this feels great. Like the handle's nice and smooth. And they said, yeah, that handle has lasted, it was since before World War II. Literally, I said, I break 2 or 3 handles sometimes in a practice because I throw on hard clay. They're like, the soil's awesome out here. They said, this handle has been on this thing for 50, 60 years. Wow. And I'm thinking, how many greats have held this one piece of wood and tried to make it go really far on these grounds? And that just gave me chills. And they told me, they said, the Newtonmore Highland Games, they did them all the way through the World Wars too. They said we never stopped it. This was what we did. And so to think wow, I got to throw a hammer that hundreds, if not thousands of men had gotten to throw. And then I was fortunate enough to break the field record. So it was wow, cool. I get to my hands launched this thing further than any other person ever has here. And it was that was one of those surreal moments that'll bring tears to your eyes. And you're sitting on the field looking around, the bagpipes and the wind is going, and you're in the middle, and you're just how am I here?
And you're representing your country too, so that's cool in itself.
Yeah, exactly.
So,
I'm the team captain of the U.S. team. I'm looking around going,
oh, that's cool.
How is this a thing? How do I get to do this? Why? What put me in this, on this field, on this day to enjoy this and talk to these people, and these people would come up to you after the event. And I'm Arthur Tartan, so and so people from my clan would come over and offer me whiskey, and we would drink together and talk about life, with just Scottish people in a teeny tiny town that rolls up the streets at 6 p.m. And I'm thinking, wow, my life is so different than yours.
Yeah.
And your life is so different than mine. But we're enjoying a beautiful day out here, and we both think it's pretty cool that the bagpipes are going and that this hammer happened to go pretty far today.
I mean, that's where I think finding common ground in that strength culture, it speaks beyond boundaries a lot of times, for sure.
Oh, it was amazing. Probably one of I need to go back because that was something I definitely hold in my heart. Part of me doesn't want to go back because it was so perfect in my mind.
You don't want to tarnish that.
Yeah, and actually, so that night, it was probably still one of my top 2 or 3 favorite memories ever. We were Sornex was just starting to really grow and start getting frantic. I would say frantic. Hectic is a better word. So It was a lot of inbound calls, outbound, you're going, right? So I was there, stressed out, but I trained for months for that game. I threw well at the game. U.S. team won, so I did as good a job as I could have personally done. My team did great. We made some great friends. We went out that night. We partied with the Scottish people. There was all these people from all over Europe. And there's this place called the Hall. It was a stone building. And during the week, it was the town hall. During Friday and Saturday night, it was the dance hall. And it was the church on Sunday.
Man.
It was wild. It was one building.
As a taxpayer, that's what I'm looking for.
It was incredible.
Let's make use of this. That's
it was
awesome.
amazing. So like we're sitting in there, and like I'd never been around like a lot of multicultural. Like I was a thrower, you'd kind of run into people, but like I'd never been in like a place where a lot of people didn't speak English. So I'm like, we're in there just dancing and having a great time, and there's people from Russia and people from Germany and all this stuff. Everyone's just having the best time. And like the B-side songs from all the like American classics, but they're listening to all like the B-sides of them, the albums, which are just so funny. I'm like, I haven't heard this song since forever. And they're like, yeah. And I was like, oh, this is great. So we're partying our butts off. We're doing all the fun stuff. So we're like, all right, I got to bounce. Like we decided we're going to throw the next day in Sterling, which is where the William Wallace Memorial Monument is.
Yeah.
So like at 2 a.m., I'm like, oh crap, I got to get out of here. We got to get up at 6 to go throw again. So I'm walking home. I remember kind of the direction, and I'm walking home. I'm wearing a kilt, and I'm walking through this town that like it's 0 people on the streets. And I remember that I could walk this way, but my hunter's brain kind of takes to topography. So I'm like, I bet I could cut across this pasture, and I could get to my bed and breakfast way faster. And I remember I'm climbing over these like rock walls that have been there hundreds, if not thousands of years. And I'm walking through this tall, like wet grass because the dew's already falling. Full moon. I could perfectly see like a countryside of the Scottish Highlands. I'd done my job. It was like there couldn't be anything more perfect. And I remember I stopped and I just looked around, and I remember thinking, I said, I'm absolutely anonymous. Not one person on this earth knows that I'm right here, right now. Yeah. I could do whatever I want, or I could do nothing. And I remember at that point in my life, I had never had that feeling or sensation, and I haven't had it since that day.
We're so connected now all the time.
Yep. I would pay so much money to go back to that frame of mind and go, because my phone didn't work out there. It was before good phones. So I was like, no one could find me. I'm safe, but I'm not obligated to anything right now. And I remember just sitting there. I was like, I want to just stay here forever because I'm at the high. I did everything I was supposed to. I've enjoyed it, and there's no bill. there's no bill waiting for me on this. And man, I go back to that place a lot of times in my mind.
Well,
and
plus, you painted the picture. The background of it, that your working life at that time was heating up, which is a good thing, but on the other hand, a stressful thing.
Oh,
and so to have that moment of tranquility in the midst of that explosion in your business was probably refreshing, to say the least.
It was amazing. It was probably 15 years ago, and I haven't had it since.
Yeah. Well, I mean, Sorin-X, when I look at some of those things, some of the projects that Sorin-X has had, I'm a Pittsburgh boy through and through, so I see my Pitt Panthers on there, and Sorin-X did the University of Pittsburgh's gym. Yeah. When I was a kid, and even now, I'm a huge Pittsburgh Penguins fan. So if I was a kid and Sorin-X did the Penguins gym, and I was the son of the owner of Sorin-X, I would think, holy crap, this is amazing. So, as this time is happening and as Sorin-X is exploding, and I mean, you weren't a kid at the time, you were a young man, so let's rewind a little bit before that, when you were more of we'll say, middle school, teenager, coming up through those years. Was there a client that your dad had that you just really, it blew you away? You were kind of set back. Garth Brooks, that was the one.
Yeah.
Nice.
So that was when Garth was popping, like 91, 92, when he was the biggest act on the planet.
Stadiums and things. Yeah.
Oh, yeah, the whole deal. Yeah, so his manager, Mickey, who was a former strength coach, called Pops. Actually, Garth called the gym, and Pops was lifting, and someone was like, "Hey, so and so Brooks is on the phone," and Pop's like, "What?" So he comes back from lifting. He's like, "Hello." The guy was like, "Yeah, this is Garth Brooks." He's like, "Wait, what?" And he said, "Yeah, my manager Mickey said you're the guy to call, and will you build me a weight room?" And Dad's like, "Wait, what?" So, anyways, long story short, we ended up building some stuff for him. When he came to Columbia for his show, he just put the gear. We delivered the gear backstage to him, put it all on his tour bus or whatever, and then he gave us like 6 front row seats and hung out with us. And he tried the number 3 gripper. I have a picture of Garth trying the gripper.
Great. How'd he do?
It was wild. Yeah, I'll post that someday. And I was like a 15-year-old kid when Garth was the biggest name on the planet, and he hung out with us for probably 30 or 45 minutes backstage and just talked about lifting. And he was a javelin thrower in college.
Oh.
So I had just started throwing discus, and Pops was a really good discus thrower, so they had some similarities, and he was awesome. And then he came back a couple years later and did the same thing. And then I think he got divorced, and then he bought another weight room for us for his other house later on. So that was like, I wasn't a huge sports fan as a kid, but like Garth Brooks was pretty cool. There was some street cred when I got back to school the next day on that one.
I bet. Front row, meeting him, the whole deal.
It was pretty cool. Yeah.
No more, what was it, the hamstring shirt?
Yeah, no, Elfo hamstring.
Yeah, no more alpha hamstring whenever you're showing them your Garth Brooks pictures.
That was pretty wild. So sometimes it was pretty, it was cooler than others. And then, so when I was in 7th grade, Pops and John Brookfield came to my middle school and did an exhibition where they tore stuff and rolled up pans and so there's kids in my, like, we're 40-something years old now that are still like, dude, I remember when your dad came to our school and like tore phone books and all this stuff. I'm like, oh yeah, I forgot that was like stuff I saw.
That's classic strongman. I mean, putting on a performance. That is cool. Well, hey, I want to be respectful of your time, Bert, but I got one.
I'm good. I'm having a fun time.
Okay, cool. So
whatever works for you. I'm having a great time.
Awesome. So, I've got to ask about when it comes to Sorin and some of the innovations, some of the inventions. We started off the show by talking about the landmine and talking about how it came about, where it wasn't really a product per se, it was just something for your training. Whether it's something that came about as a product idea or just straight from training, do you have a favorite innovation over the years that you just really enjoy?
Yeah, I would say probably the one I'm most proud of would be like the rig concept.
Yeah. Because
the rig concept / base camp kind of thing. Simply because I truly believe that it changed the game of strength equipment. I mean, every company now offers something like that, and what I mean by rig of modular system, a series of uprights, cross members, and accessories that pop into holes. Mm-hmm. It's pretty neat to know that, I drew that on a napkin.
Yeah. Yeah, that's neat.
Kind of neat, like literally about 3 drinks deep, and I'm just like, oh, that'd be cool. And I remember like drawing it, and my girlfriend at the time, I was like, this will change the strength game. This is cool. And I put it in my pocket, and I'm
Look
like,
at this.
They're like, this is cool. I think this would work.
That's great, Bert.
Yeah. Anyways, nice. But like that. I'm probably. Yeah, just because we built our business on that, and I know or I feel that even if I was to die today, like there would be fingerprints of that on the industry for a while, So it's something that I think there's some relevancy there that I kind of appreciate.
Well, imitation is the finest form of flattery. So when you mention other companies and rig systems and things, I know that doesn't soothe things financially, but on the other hand, it's nice to know that you were the one who drew it on the napkin.
I've had some sleepless nights over things like that, and finally you're just like, how first world problems is it of me to really I haven't missed a meal in a while. My kids have shoes.
The heat is on.
It's just like, okay, and I think it keeps you hungry. It makes you smarter. Should I have patented the rig system when I should have? Yes. I didn't.
You got to watch the movie Glass Onion, The Knives Out on Netflix. I'm not going to give anything away. I'll just tell you that things are drawn on a napkin and it's central to the plot. So.
Oh, okay,
Go watch,
interesting. Yeah,
go watch it. It's just a whodunit
that'd be
kind
cool.
of murder mystery that's on there.
Okay,
And
yeah,
it's,
I think I've seen it when I've been flying, and I've seen it. I didn't know what it was about, so yeah, I'll check it out.
but the napkin will connect to you. You'll be like,
Okay,
God,
yeah,
dang it! I should have
well,
taken that napkin to the trademark office. So,
yeah,
and I know that's not how you file a trademark. But speaking of which,
that'd be good.
even the name landmine. I mean, the origin of the name landmine is because of the explosiveness of it. Correct?
Explosive at
Of the
ground
movement.
level.
Yeah.
Yeah, it was
So
that
now,
was literally the whole thing. It was like, oh, we're exploding at ground level because prior to that, a lot of people were laying down. Like that was kind of when hammer strength started doing the ground based stuff, and like so you're on your feet, and other people started talking like, hey, why are we always laying on all these benches? If we're athletes, we need to be on our feet. So that was kind of that. Well, like you're on the ground and you're creating explosiveness. It was
landmine. It is. It's a cool name.
20-second thing.
Yeah, it stuck. So then
Okay.
it makes me wonder, though, because I'm not well versed in this business side of things or anything like that. I see any number of companies, any number of whatever cheap landmines on Amazon called landmines. At what point does it go beyond facial tissues to just people calling it Kleenex? You know, if you get my drift, that you know it's not a Sorin brand, but it's called the landmine. Is it?
Yeah.
You know, is that something that just it was so pervasive that it just legally wasn't worth pursuing, or was it?
Yeah, at this
You know,
point, I mean, I don't even know where you'd start them. We get hacked on. I mean, even things we have patents on, we have to send letters often. You
Yeah.
know, it's just like, you know, I'm not a big litigation guy, but at some point, it's like you put up a fence in your yard so people don't jack up your yard, and you gotta, like, you have to fight for it because, you know, I don't want to come up with the next landmine and not get a piece of it.
Yeah.
That's a little bit dumb, right? Hopefully I've learned something in 24 years of doing this.
Well, I mean,
So yeah, I mean, it's cool if everyone calls it a landmine now or whatever, like, great. That's our
Yeah.
gift to the world. And we made a
Yeah.
few of them in the meantime and glad that it stuck, you know?
I mean, what made me think of it was Iron Mind and the axle. Whenever I was looking into researching the axle for an episode, and it was actually the episode I mentioned Mark Henry. On their website, they had talked about how they technically the axle is their trademark, like their bar that they put out, but that it just became too much constantly pursuing people for using it. So now, whatever. If you're
Yeah, I could see that because
whatever
it was the
company that just calls
wheels.
it the axle and makes a bar, then so be it.
Yeah, I think you're right. I mean, because I remember when they came out with it was because they had the Pollen's wheels, and then
Exactly.
if you didn't have the wheels, obviously you would have a Pollen's axle. I mean, Strossen was great at coming up with names. He was really, really good at it. And then, of course, it gets thrown into a number of places, and you know, I mean, I kind of laugh. It's I can't be super offended if the people copying my stuff don't even know I made it.
Yeah,
That's
true.
like a thing. I've
true.
thought about that. I'm like, man, there's a ton of companies making racks that look like rigs or landmines or glute ham rollers or strap safeties or a myriad of other things that have no idea who Sorin or Bert Sorin is.
Yeah.
Like, a little bit of it is frustrating because you're like, man, at least like pay respects if you're not going to pay me.
Yeah.
But and then the other
Be a
part of me
tip
is
of the
like,
hat, something. Yeah.
something, you know. But the other part of me is like, get over yourself. Like,
Yeah,
move
sure.
on. Like, just.
I mean, strength is a passion, but at the end of the day, you're running a business, and it's also putting a roof over your family's head. So you gotta, like you said, you gotta get a piece of the action a little bit.
You would hope.
But I mean,
you know.
as far as what you're saying, it reminds me of a story a buddy of mine told me recently about an older gentleman came to his place to purchase some used gym equipment. I deal a lot in talking with people about the used market with vintage weights and stuff. And he said, "You'll never believe this. I think he's telling the truth." He said, "I invented the trap bar." And I said, "Well, what's his name?" He said, "His name's Al Gerard." And I said, "Well, yeah, you met the inventor of the trap bar." He's like, "Get out of here." So, yeah, I mean, Al Gerard just stopped by his place and saw that he had a home gym and said, "Yeah, I invented that thing over there." So, have you ever...
Yeah, and so if Gerard isn't pissed off, like,
Yeah, exactly.
that's the thing, right?
Because how many trap bars are there out there? So, have you ever been in that position where you did see someone using something, talking about something, and you're like, well, actually, I came up with that?
Yeah, you don't try to like drop that on necessarily people, but if it comes up, I mean, I'd probably say maybe as I'm older, I have a little bit more couth and maturity. But if someone like, it's hard when someone like tells you about a landmine one day.
Yeah.
Like, they're like, you're like,
Yeah. Oh, I went to this great landmine university clinic thing, whatever it is.
yeah,
I don't
yeah,
even
or
know
like,
what
oh,
they're
you want to
called.
try doing stuff with landmines? You're like,
Yeah, you
that'd be
should
great.
look into that.
Yeah, and so I've kind of just tried to like practice my own maturity and not knee jerk reaction, and just go. Okay, it's more of just a self control scenario.
Yeah.
Just to go. Okay, you don't always have to be that guy or be right or You don't always have to set the history right per se. Like at some point, you're just going to chase everyone around barking to say, and it's just like, for what? Like,
There's guys like me that one of my passions is history and strength history that'll figure it out. So you don't have to worry about it.
well, and honestly, that was why I've said for years, I was like, man, I wish, and I was like, I would sponsor it just so it would happen. And I said, but I can't because I don't want to be involved. I want it to be what you're doing. I was like, I wish someone cared enough to actually dig, because there's so much out there that isn't the way it seems.
Oh, yeah.
But it can't have anything to do with me, because then it's slighted, and I don't ever want it slighted. I just want the truth to come out of stuff, because, man, there's a lot of interesting stories out there.
There are.
So I applaud what you're doing, and I really, really appreciate it.
I appreciate it. I appreciate support as well. I don't know if I can be a sponsored athlete, but I appreciate you coming on here. I could be your sponsored amateur historian anytime. So,
it's cool, but I would love to have you. I'd love to host you here. I mean, Pops has forgotten more about this stuff than most people alive have ever learned. And we have a ton of stuff here, and he could tell you about everything. I mean, thousands of pieces in there. So I think you would very much enjoy it, but there might be some stuff that maybe would fill in some of the blanks for you as well.
For sure. I would love it. I heard, a very sweet story about your father from more of an acquaintance than a friend. We weren't really good friends, but he unfortunately passed away recently. But he told me a story how
who's that?
He was a collector of vintage weights, and he dealt a lot in them and things. And he I'd rather not say his name, but he just, because I don't know how his family would feel about things. But the story is just that he was a great storyteller, and one of his first stories he ever told me, because I mean, you couldn't talk to this guy about like, oh yeah, I'll buy that off you for whatever, $200. That's a short conversation. It would take 2 hours to figure that out with him, because he'd tell you a 20-minute story about the history of it, which I loved. So I'd be on the phone for hours and hours with him. And one of his first big stories is about how, blobs, you like blobs? I saw the first blob I ever made. I have a signed blob from Richard Sorin. I said, oh, really? Like, you got him to sign it? And he's like, yeah, I met him. Like, I went in there, I'm driving through, and I heard about this museum, so I went in. I asked the kid who was working there. I was like, hey, who owns this place? Like, where's Pop Sorin? And I was just kind of, putting on a front, and then the kid took me up there to his office, and I spent like the whole day with him. And he I won't retell his whole story. I don't want to tell another man's complete story, but I just want to mention it as a compliment to you and your family and your father that, that meant so much to this guy, talking strength history, talking about weights, and spending that time with him for that day. And he was a stranger for all respects.
Wow.
And so when it comes to iron history, finding that common ground means a lot to people, because as we mentioned earlier, sometimes you don't know a lot of people with that common ground.
Yeah, there's not many of us, and I very much appreciate that, and and not trying to flex in any way, but like I've seen Pops do that hundreds of times. I mean, I've seen, when there was only 2 or 3 of us working at Sorinex, he would take an entire day with a stranger that would walk in. I'm looking like, as a business model, this is a horrible business model. Like, but he just loved it. And he's like, strength has given me everything in my life. He goes, it's been the one constant was the weights. And he goes, so I owe I owe the weights everything. And he's like, so if I could inspire someone and share the love that I have with anybody who shares a minuscule amount of the same passion, like that's why we made the museum. I mean, the museum, a lot of collectors, they'll take stuff and put it away and never like let it see the light of day. We put a 2,000 square foot museum in our prime place. It's the first thing you walk into. You don't walk into Sorin stuff. You walk into the museum because we want to show it reverence and let people lift. If you want to, I mean, Pop still, when he deadlifts, he lifts on the original Jackson set.
That's awesome.
Like today, like, and people are like, oh my gosh, you know how that thing, much that thing's
you
worth?
might crack
the
like, plate, yeah.
Because it survived the last 50 years. What am I going to die saying I never got to use it? It's like, no, like now my DNA's in this thing, you know?
Exactly.
And so
it's part of the story.
So, like, it's all to be used. It's all to be, you know, people could come and try to lift the bell that Mark Henry lifted. Try to, you know, lift on the squat stands that Terry Todd, you know, won the powerlifting championships on, and you know, all these, you know, that Bednarski lifted on. And I mean, Pops has Bednarski's belt here.
Wow.
You know, just all these like just crazy things, but it's all just a bunch of metal if there's no stories behind it.
Exactly. And weights tell a story, you know.
They tell a story, but there has to be that depth. There has to be people who cares. There has to be people like yourself that's like digging for the past and like putting the pieces together as a curator of this. Otherwise, one day, you know, unfortunately, at some point, all that stuff that's out there will be thrown away by somebody.
Yeah,
it will lose value at some point.
Well, I mean, it sounds grandiose, but part of the reason I love taking some forgotten, rusty piece of metal that was in someone's basement for years and forgotten, or garage, or in the back of a barn, where I mean, I've found weights all over the place, and then not just restoring it, but then using it, is that I feel like I'm breathing life back into it. You know, it's got a story to tell, but I'm also saving it. I'm taking it out of obscurity and bringing it back to life, and then putting it on the bar and lifting it. So, or getting it to someone that will, you know, if I trade it or sell it or something.
Yeah, you're showing it respect, you know.
Yeah, I don't know. To some people, they wouldn't get it. They wouldn't. They'd be like, whatever. It's a great job cleaning off the rust. But I mean, to me, it's more than that. It's bringing it back to life. And you know, some of these companies that aren't even around anymore, it's cool to think, oh, look, I'm still using this. I'm going to put this on my barbell and I'm going to lift it.
Right. And it still does the same thing as it used to.
Exactly.
You know, it does what it's supposed to do. And what a beautiful thing, not saying trying to personify a weight, but like what something it's made for in its job, don't fire it. Like
exactly.
Let it do its job. Like a hunting dog wants to hunt. A lifter wants to lift. Like those weights, they want to be lifted. They want to be struggled against. Like that's the cool stuff. Like that's the beauty of this whole thing that I wish more people would see, like the iron game as something much more than big muscles or whatever it is. And that's where some of my mentors have drilled that into me, which I feel very fortunate that maybe I got it earlier than most people did.
Well, I mean, it's an art at times, and it's more complex than I think some people give it credit for. And as far as weights are concerned, you know, tech and stuff like that's coming into the gym and into the home gym space for sure. There's various technologies, and I'm asking you about innovations and things that you've made through your career, but I'm pretty sure no matter what changes occur, that weights, barbells, racks, dumbbells, you know, just the tried and true are still going to be there. And I pray that my children are going to outlive me, but I'm 100% sure that all these weights are going to outlive me. So that's when you talk about the DNA being in there. I'm sure that the weights that surround me in my gym right now, as I speak to you, they're going to live longer than I am, and I'm going to be part of their story. I will have lifted them. So hopefully, I pray my children will be lifting them.
Yeah, and if not, you hope someone that'll appreciate them for what they are. You know, and we have a Jackson set out there that I can't remember what gym it was at, but a lot of the bigs went there. You know, like you start naming off names, and all those folks have lifted those weights. You're like, everyone's sweat and DNA and effort and intent and passion are in some cellular level in that handle.
Yeah.
Like, that's alive to me. Like, that's. I mean, I like old guns. I like old knives. I like stuff with stories. And that's that passion that you can't like re-replicate necessarily. And like Pops became friends with Bob Zuver Jr.
Nice. Yeah.
Probably 10 or 12 years ago, and we
He's
have
on
a bunch of
Facebook groups and things. And,
He is, yeah, he sure is. And
so I don't know him personally, but I've seen his posts and things.
He's great. I haven't spoken with him in years, but we've had some long. I mean, he and Pops used to stay on the phone for 3 hours a day at times. And Pops went out there and visited him 10, 12 years ago, and hung out.
Oh, it's on Sorinex's website. I read when I was doing a little Zuver research. I read a write-up that Robert Zuver did about Pops visiting. So actually, I read that.
It was awesome. Yeah, and just and as a son, as a second generation like I am, listening to Bob Zuver Jr., who grew up with a dad. I mean, my dad always looked up to Bob Zuver Sr., and to see the similarities of those two, both of them were masters. Both of them were different. They were eccentric. They were passionate. They were driven. They saw things that other people didn't see, regardless of how much coaxing had been done. Most people didn't see it because it was so out there. So, I mean, Bob and I had some good cathartic talks of like, what is it like to grow up under the shadow of, I don't want to say a madman, but like of someone who is definitely a Da Vinci of the time.
Oh yeah.
And he's like, man, he would have me. He was telling me he and his dad would go to Disneyland a couple times a week, and they would just for ideas,
just to look around.
Just to look around.
Oh, that's
and then
amazing.
They would go to junkyards, and he was like, oh yeah, he would have me pull these things back, and we would make these just outlandish pieces of equipment. So there was like this vaudevillian style, this like Disney-y style, like the bigger the better, 1950s, 1960s, just. And then there was these like great designs, and Bob Jr. was like, yeah, I was the guy who had to weld all that crap.
Yeah, exactly.
So,
He did
he was doing the grunt work.
Dad brought home this guardrail, but I was the guy who had to make it into an incline bench.
100%, yeah. And so, like, being able to talk to someone who had a similar relationship, their dads were visionaries that saw these things, and he was, and especially in his early years, kind of along for the ride.
I'm mixing stories there a little bit. I don't know if Bob Jr. actually had to make the guardrail into incline bench, but I'm pretty sure I read a story there somewhere.
I would totally, yeah.
That.
He was telling me about. Remember the big door they had at one of the building, and it was like 2,000-pound concrete door, and he was telling me how he made the forms for it. And like,
that's wow. A 2,000-pound door, just that.
Yeah, like who
says
thought
everything.
to make a 2,000-pound door that was so perfectly balanced, but it was like where you had to pull it pretty hard to open it, so there was still like a barrier of entry, literally, that you had to be able to row a certain amount just to open this 2,000-pound door, and to dream that up. And again, what is this, in the 50s or 60s?
Yeah.
The physical culture community was not robust like it is now. That was so far advanced.
And I mean, the world's largest dumbbell, and was it a gorilla? And they had
a
big. I forget the saying, but I just posted it the other day on this account on my Home Gym History Instagram as a follow-up with the Christ is in all of us, something like that, a big religious glowing sign over everything. And I think part of on one hand, I'm really happy to see so many newer people getting interested in older weights and getting into vintage weights. But sometimes I see someone new come in and ask, and when I say come in, it could be into any kind of forum or Facebook or Discord or wherever, and they'll ask, where do I get Zuvers? And, they don't realize that it's like the rarest plates possible. That's why they're the most valuable. And they're just very distinct. They have the muscular man on them, so they're extremely unique. But lately, I've started to think like, oh, man, like, I don't want the plates to outshine the gym, if that makes sense.
Right.
Because the more I learn about Zuver's gym, it's not that I don't like the plates. I do. They're very cool looking plates. but there's so much more. Dr. Ken living in a
Oh, there
trailer
were commodity
behind the
portions
gym.
of
There's
that.
so many
Yeah.
stories. I mean, how cool is that? I mean, one of Strength's greatest, Dr. Ken, is living in a trailer just so he can work out there. I mean, he wasn't one of the greatest at the time, but just
Right.
drawing those lines and connections.
Oh,
And, just like you were saying, all the people that may have touched this, all the people that may have worked out there, I mean, the greats worked out there.
yeah. The first world's strongest man used those
Exactly.
Zuber plates, and
Yep.
then, but you figure who was involved in that?
1977, somewhere in
Yeah,
there.
it was Dougie Edmonds and Terry Todd and Dave Webster, like
Yeah.
all the same names.
There's a picture
You know?
of Bob Zuber Sr. with like a World's Strongest Man hat on, like that I remember seeing. And actually, to bring this full circle, I think I remember Bob Zuber Jr. posting that hat, like a picture of that hat, and thinking like, holy crap, there's the hat. Like that was the World's Strongest Man.
Crazy.
So
Crazy. Yeah, that's the things like you just look, or like I remember him. He said when the gym was really small, and he ran a powerlifting team, and he said the gym they got so many lifters in there that he said his dad made like a piece of plywood, like a bed that was on a pulley system, and he would lay on it and elevate himself over the people in the gym so he could watch from like a bird's nest. He said so he wasn't an extra body in the gym.
amazing.
Like
Yeah.
that guy was on such a different level.
Yeah.
It was like, you've got to be kidding me. Well, then you start looking, start tying that tree together.
Yeah.
They were in Culver City, California. Well, who was right down the road, right?
Well, we're talking about Bill Peanuts West.
You got it.
Yeah. So
The original West
the
Side
original
barbell
West Side, absolutely.
that used Zuber's plates.
Yeah.
So
Because
they
he
would
had to
borrow
come
the
borrow
plate.
them, right?
You got it. He would
Yeah.
borrow the plates, and then of course, Peanuts West is who basically came up with the squat suit to an extent, wrapped sheets around,
Sure.
the whole deal, hassock squat.
How wild is
everything.
that to think about? Like, I would have paid to be a fly on the wall when he's explaining that. Like, all right, listen, we're gonna wrap some
here's what we're
sheets
gonna
around
do.
you. Like, here's the plan.
Yeah. Here's the plan, and then we're gonna squat down to this hassock thing, and we're gonna do this, and then for years later, Louis Simmons coming,
Yep.
paying respects to Peanuts, naming West Side Barbell. Like I'd give it 98% of the people that West Side Barbell probably don't know that part of the story.
That's a really good point, and I wonder that if they know that connection, and if they know why.
Yeah.
If they know Louis, to the best of my recollection, got conjugate from reading about the Russian lifters, but the
Correct.
rack work and working in the rack and some like the squat suit and all that stuff, is coming from Bill Peanuts West. So
Right. Yeah, and here's an interesting part. Well, and so we know, Bill Peanuts died basically a pauper.
I didn't know that. No.
Yeah, died with
Man,
nothing. It was in an unmarked grave for years.
Oh.
And then a bunch of us kicked in probably 15 years ago and bought him a proper headstone.
That's cool.
Yeah, it was pretty neat. But of course, Louie and Doris were some of them. My dad and I, and a couple other people in that world.
Yeah.
But you look at what was that thing? Okay, so then you talk about the power rack. So then you switch it back over. So that'd have been the 50s, 60s, Peanuts West, 60s. Go across the country to the Elizabeth YMCA. Do you know any story about that in New Jersey?
No.
Okay.
Or at least I can't. I can't bring it right now. Yeah.
Okay, so you'll like this. So, have you ever heard of the tight tan slacks of Des Aubin?
Oh yes. So your father's coach.
So that was Desi.
Yeah.
Desi,
Yeah. Came to the party
Desi-
in slacks. Was always seen in
You got it.
sweatpants. Yeah.
So,
Okay.
so you know who else he coached before? So this random Elizabeth, which is right outside of Newark,
Okay.
New Jersey YMCA. Dave Draper was training there when Pops was a high schooler, and then Dave.
Wow.
Pops didn't know it till he and Dave were talking 40 years later.
Oh, okay. So he wasn't like in high school looking at Dave Draper training. It was.
He was in high school
Years
looking
later.
at Dave Draper, but he was not known as Dave Draper, the
Gotcha.
blonde bomber.
Okay.
Pops just knew him as Big Dave. So he got a
That's awesome.
deal out west, and he went over to California, but he was training there. Desi was training him. He went over and became the blonde bomber, Dave Draper. Pops was like, yeah, we never really saw Big Dave after a little. And I'm like, what did he look like? He's a big blonde guy.
Yeah.
And he and Dave were
Big
talking,
Dave.
and he was like, yeah, and you could like see the things click, like, holy crap, that was you, like it was hilarious, So
Oh, man,
there
that's
was
great.
that, and then you ever heard of the name Anthony DiTillo?
Yes, I have.
Anthony DiTillo and Pops were training partners
Yeah. Okay.
back then. So Tony DiTillo, the original Tony, there's his son.
Because his
Anthony
son
DiTillo.
lived. Yeah.
Right, but original Anthony DiTillo lived in a candy shop above the YMCA.
Okay.
And so he would come down there. So Desi would train Pops and DiTillo. So one day when Pops was still in high school, he took the power racks. And if you remember, the York power racks are really narrow, right?
The isometric axe, yeah.
Correct. That was
only
what
about,
they.
I don't know, maybe a foot and a half. Yeah. Very
Not
narrow.
even. Not even. They were made for isometrics, and there's a long story about that, why they were made, which I won't get into.
That would be part 2. Yeah.
Right. So they had one in the gym, and Pops
Okay.
one day was like, hey, so he took it home to his house and cut it apart and moved it a little bit wider and threw pins in there.
Gotcha.
He said everyone got super pissed off, and they were like, why'd you mess up our thing? And he was like, well, this is stupid. We're not doing isometrics. We need to train inside this thing.
Mm-hmm.
So because of that, Anthony DiTillo, they said one of the guys who worked out with him had these steel rollers that had like a urethane coating over them. And so they started using them as safeties. So DiTillo started doing pin presses and a lot of power rack work with doing partials with the rack that my dad as a high schooler made.
Yeah.
That DiTillo ended up doing a lot of the writing, which caused the partials and the pin presses in the powerlifting world came from Anthony DiTillo.
Nice.
So that was kind of that tree that almost happened by accident.
Yeah.
And then when we were talking to Charles Poliquin years and years later, Poliquin goes, holy crap, DiTillo is who I read that I got all my started my principles from. So it was this weird like high school Richard Sorin cut apart this power rack that Anthony DiTillo wrote all of his articles on that inspired Charles Poliquin that took my mentor Judd Logan as an athlete, putting through 4 Olympics, and then he's becoming my friend and coach in the 2000s. It was like, this is crazy, that's the interesting part of
all those weird connections. Yeah,
yeah, it's so cool. I love it.
It really is. And I mean, I'm just even thinking through like my podcast, and I did a history of the power rack, but that's a missing chunk right there, and it actually did start to come back to me. I heard that somewhere about him widening the isometric rack, and I was like, oh man, like I already did my power rack episode, but I'm like, it's all right, I'll do a part 2. But now I don't have to. You've covered the Hireland Games for me. You covered a little bit of the rack history there, so we're knocking this out, Bert. I mean,
no, I just kind of think like, especially a gym like that back in the day, like a random YMCA gym, and you had like some absolute hammers that came out of it.
Well, and just the environment that at a random YMCA gym, it's acceptable for a high school kid to start cutting stuff up and making things.
That takes it home and cuts it.
Like I'll bring it back tomorrow.
He said there was a bench press there that because Pops is tall and has long arms, he kept like almost overshooting the bench. So he took that home and sawed off the top and then drilled a hole in it and then made it adjustable. And he was just like,
perfect.
Everyone, he goes, they almost hung me. He was like, those older dudes were so pissed off at me for screwing up their bench until like later they appreciated it, adjusted, and then like we were cool again.
Yeah.
And I was just thinking like, wow, you're like a 16, 17-year-old Richard Sorin. Like that was the start of Sorin. Like you're just like, it could be better. I'm going to go do it and I'll ask forgiveness later.
We're going to tinker with this some. And I find that sometimes, I mentioned this on a previous episode about how when I'm going to buy stuff, my home gym's fairly small. I have just enough room for a rack and then tons of weights, basically. So whenever I buy someone's old home gym and I basically want the dumbbells or the weights or the barbells, I don't really need the other stuff, but I do appreciate it sometimes when I find like homemade welded stuff that someone made. So like I bought this old steelworkers gym, who here in Pittsburgh, being a steelworker is like a fairly common thing when you meet an older gentleman.
Right.
But he like welded all his own stuff. He made it all. I mean, he brought home steel from the mill and made his own plates. So I had these like homemade chunks of steel that I was using for grip work.
So cool. Like that, I
it's
just
just
hope
kind
that
of
stuff
neat.
never goes away.
Exactly. So people just kind of they think of what they want and they make it happen if they have the skills to do so. So I think that's cool that even at that age, your dad, like you said, that's the start really of Sorin X. He's thinking through, wow, I'm overshooting the bench. What can I do about this? You know,
I could solve it, and then you know, and that he had the courage to do it, I think is crazy.
Yeah. Well, that's what made me laugh before, the image of some high school kid like cutting up and welding a YMCA's equipment. You know,
Yeah,
my
you
daughter,
get away.
one of my daughters is a Y princess, and we go to the Y, you know, that kind of stuff. It's like
You
I
get
don't
away
think
with a
that's
lot
gonna
in the
happen.
'60s.
Yeah, I don't think that's happening today. No one's cutting up their
Yeah,
stuff.
probably not. Probably
Oh,
not. I mean, and I've been to his house when he was a kid. He didn't have like a shop. It was like a little duplex house in New Jersey.
Okay.
Like I don't even know where he would have done it. Like in the backyard.
Yeah.
Or like It's just.
Well, what about the garage gym you mentioned? Like when you're 7, 8, 5 o'clock is lifting time. What did that gym look like?
Yeah, so we have some old pictures. I need to post some more stuff. It was pretty cool. It was a 2-car garage, wood paneling on the walls, carpet, air conditioning. Well, at first it was not. It was just cement floor, you know, the whole normal garage. And I remember finally he made it like pretty good at one point because that, again, funny part, that was the showroom for Sorin X, was his 2-car garage.
Nice.
Yeah, so but he welded the stuff there. No, because at that point we had a shop. The first, literally, he was welding it in the garage and then just lifting on it. So it had rubber mats, this and that, and then I think he turned that into then it was a garage, and then he had his other little, like a bedroom in the house was his little lifting place.
So then most of the equipment he just made himself in that, kind of like the gentleman, the steel worker I was describing. You know, he just
100%
made his own stuff, other than the plates and Jackson sets and things that he bought and owned.
Yeah, exactly. And it was like him exploring. Like I remember 2 or 3 different methods of each thing working, and you could just do those early days of like, there's an art, and we're exploring. We're trying this out. And, hey, this pin works. Hey, this doesn't work, and you know, just neat stuff that. And it was all based on his training, so he would just make it work for him, and then it was like, if it was good, it would get added to the early catalog.
Yeah.
Sorin.
So now, fast forward, I've seen your home gym, or at least a picture of it, on the Sorin X website. Yeah. Looks a little more polished than probably that 2-car garage. But I also noticed 2 things about it. I noticed that your rack is very tall. What's the inspiration there? Is it just so that you have that height to do overhead lifts and to do the various? I saw the bars on top. And then, the second thing would be the spears. I mean, you have spears in your home gym, at least in the picture. So what's
they're there? So my old home gym, my first home gym, was a little 2-car garage. I never had parked a vehicle in a garage. I had like my little fishing boat in there, my little stuff. So my first home gym took up about 4 feet by 2 feet.
Oh wow!
And this was 10 years ago.
Yeah.
So I had like a rack, and I had to like make it fit between the 2 garage door tracks.
Okay.
And so I took tubing, I cut it down. I literally took stuff that was like scratch and dent out of the shop and threw it on the bandsaw and like made it perfectly fit in my one little spot. And I mean, it was literally like this big, all the weights I put in set, so all the weight stayed inside of it. I put 2 plates that held a pair of power blocks. Like, it was wildly dense.
Yeah.
And then so we moved to the new house. We had a little bit of I had that building out back, and then but I kind of liked. It's so funny. Like, I build really, really, really awesome weightlifting equipment for everyone that's like super badass, but I always kind of like that same thing Pops did. I like kind of exploring stuff.
Yeah.
So I'm like, I'm just going to keep these 4 uprights and just build onto it and just see what's the least amount of stuff that I could build and make it cool.
Okay.
Because we're always busy in the shop too, so I never want to like stress the shop for stuff for me.
That's true.
So I'll just like find scraps and I'll cut them and I'll go, okay guys, weld this up real quick and throw it into powder on your painting green. Yeah, paint it green, you know. And so the rack in my house is literally like, remember that old Johnny Cash song? It's like one piece at a time.
Oh yeah.
My rack is like a 10-year-old one piece at a time. And And so then it was like, well, it's too low, but I want it higher. So then I built that art, but then I could climb it up, and I have different, heights for pull-ups. And then I made an extension, a 4-foot extension off the top, because I had a arm sticking off that I would put a rope climb on, because I wanted my kids to start climbing the rope.
Yeah.
And then, and then it just started growing. It's like, I'll get a VersaClimber. Well, I need to put a VersaClimber somewhere. I don't have a wall to mount it on. So I made a bracket that's fit on the back of the rack for the VersaClimber. It worked. Usually my stuff's like all the pilot try it outs, prototypes.
Sure.
And then it worked. And so we're like, oh, cool, make it a product. Good. Other people will probably want this.
Yeah.
And then so it just kept growing, and then we moved. We just built a house a year ago.
I was going to say, you're like that person in the neighborhood that keeps adding additions to their house, only it's your rack. You just keep, adding additions, like, well, we'll put this over here, you'll put this over here.
Yeah, like I have some new jammer arms going on there soon. Our new ones are about to launch. I have some new stuff that hasn't hit the light of day yet that, I'll play with, and I'll bang on it for 6 months, and if it works, then okay, it's good enough for public consumption. If it's not, it's an interesting idea that I got out of my mind.
That's the R&D department at Sorin X.
is basically my house. Well, because otherwise we put it here, then everyone either sees it or the sales guys walk in. They're like, next time you notice, they're like selling it to a customer. I'm like, dude, like stop. They're like, but he liked it. I'm like, yeah, but it's not even a thing yet.
Yeah, that's true.
So yeah, that's my home gym. I call it the cave, and I wanted it to do
ask that because
things.
A lot of people name their home gym. So yours is the cave?
The cave, yeah, because when I first got there, my kids were little, and they were like, wow, this is like a cave when they walked into the building. And then we're like, my kids are little, they call, let's go to Daddy's cave, the cave. And then, I'm sure other people have named theirs the cave, but mine's maybe the most popular cave at this point.
It's your cave,
It's my cave.
There are many caves in the world, but this cave is mine.
This one is mine, and it's like people call it the man cave, but I call it the fam cave because it's like I want to have it. I want it to be a place for me to lift. Mm-hmm. It's a place where I get ready for all my adventures. I'll have tables laid out and pallet racking, so I'll pull stuff. So like I might go and train at night, and I might shoot my bow every other set, and I'll be packing bags for a hunt. And and lifting at the same time. And I know people are like, oh, you're not that focused. I'm like, I'm 45 years old, man. Like, I focused a bunch of times lifting. Sometimes I lift so I'm sane.
Hey,
and so
I had a bin in my home gym of oxalic acid, cleaning plates in between sets one time. Like, why not? I mean, I'm taking nice long rests during this during these sets. I'm just sitting here. I might as well scrub some plates. So I just picked it up and hauled it in there. Why not? And I mean, do all kinds of stuff. The current book that I'm reading, sometimes I'll have a book sitting in there to kind of flip through, and I'm not reading like intently, but I'll flip through something and read a little bit and then come back to it. And then other times, depending on the training session, there's nothing. It's just silent. I lift in the morning, so everyone's asleep, and that's the duality of a home gym, I think, for parents. And I've been working on there'll be a future episode of Home Gym History. I don't know who the guest will be, but the theme will be that it'll be parenthood in the home gym, because there's a duality there. I think of this is something for you, and at 5 a.m, when all is quiet and it's just me and my weights, that's like the most peaceful time in my day. But on the other hand, there's such immense joy when my children come in here. And I mean, when my 4-year-old hub lifted a 10-pound weight, that was huge. It was like, oh my gosh, like this is amazing. Or,
amazing.
Garage gym competition, I entered all my kids, and they did it all. Now, they may have deadlifted with a wooden dowel and some 2.5s on it, but what the heck?
Perfect.
Or I think my oldest son used a 25-pound curl bar, but hey, he was really proud to bench press a 25-pound curl bar at the age of 6. So, yeah, I mean, I think it's cool to have the kids in there, but I also think it's neat that it's equally something just for you. So when it comes to your family and being the family cave, I don't know how old your kids are, and you don't have to say if you don't like, but
6, 8, and 11.
Okay, so no serious training as of yet. But I mean, what's your favorite thing in the home gym with the family, or in the home gym with the kids?
Well, lately, so part of like what you're saying with the family, I want them to see me struggle and strain habitually. I want them to see, go, oh, Daddy takes time for himself to go do something hard, and there's time when he's serious and he's cuddling and playing with us, and there's times when he gets aggressive and does his thing, and that's okay. We can see the duality of that. Then he's going to come over and hug me and play with me, but when he's under the bar, like this is a different thing. So I saw that, and it made huge impacts on me. I'll be honest, like for Christmas, I bought him some fold out mats. So we have basically a wrestling spot in there. And so we do a lot of towel wrestling. And so like we have a climbing wall we built on there. So the kids love the climbing wall, but like recently it's been towel wrestling just because that oxytocin and dopamine release and just biting and everything like that. And it's a fun warm up for me or a cool down, or sometimes I go like, I'm going to use it for my warm up. And then 30 minutes later, we're still doing it. I'm like, I don't need to lift today. I'm fine. Like, again, like, and I hate to say it that way, but it's just like, I'll be all right.
Yeah.
You know, I'd rather spend time with my kid and, you know, and then, but the whole key of it is just to let them know how to struggle. And that we have a thing we did this summer. We call it the strugglers.
The strugglers.
And
nice.
The strugglers. And so myself, Josh Dobby, who's my marketing manager, Luke Day, who's a strength coach at South Carolina football, and my next door neighbor, we all have kids that are same age. So we would all come over there, which is hilarious. Like, it's like, you know, a bunch of college athletes and a college strength coach are their coaches. So the whole point of it was like, we brought all of our kids. We would teach them the three things that they would always have to go for were maximum effort, a good attitude, and attentiveness. So that's what we're trying to teach them. Those are the facets that we're really going for. And the strugglers is, the whole point of this is to learn to struggle well. Life is a struggle. You're not trying to get out of the struggle. You're learning to struggle well. And so we will teach them pulling, pressing, hinging, squatting, like the basic motor patterns of things. Mm-hmm. We'll have usually a fun warm-up. We'll ever done a KIMS test, a keep in mind test. So like,
okay.
So when we start them off, we'll go over like what are the rules of, you know, kind of go through that. And then I'll have 10 to 12 items laid out on a table with a towel over it. So they come over and it's like, it's hard because they're little kids, right? And they're looking everywhere.
Oh, yeah.
Now, part of what we're working on is
the attentive part.
Yeah, I'll pull it away. I'll start a stopwatch. They have 2 minutes. No one says anything, and you stare, and you try to memorize, but also learn the idiosyncrasies of each piece and put them in memory. Keep it in memory. KIM. Keep in mind. We close it off. Then we do the lesson. We do the exercises. We do an obstacle course. We do all this, you know, physical implementation. Then we come back and we say, who could remember parts, and like, what did you remember? Tell me some of the things. And so,
okay, I've never done that. That's cool.
Trying to build in, can they remember? How many people can remember 2 things, 5 things, 8 things? Like they go, screwdriver. You're like, okay, tell me more. Phillips head. Okay, tell me more. Yellow handle. Okay, tell me more. Short, long. Like you start realizing like there's a lot of descriptors to things. And so we're trying to get them to look at details and see something and then have a stressor and then be able to remember it. Thought being that there will be times in their life that will be a really, really helpful thing, whether it's in an emergency or something like that. So that's the attentiveness.
Or just
and so then
whatever pursuit they have. You know what I mean? Cool. Like, and I'm not even talking career. I mean, at a young age, whatever pursuit they have, it could be some kind of sport, some kind of extracurricular activity, something in school. So, yeah.
Right. So we do that, and then we end it, usually if there's the summer, we'd end at something aquatic. So we would swim, or we started throwing indoor shot puts at the bottom of the pool and see who could go down and get them, you know. So we worked on breath. Then we turned that into breath work. We turned that into
How much does an indoor shot put weigh?
I got little ones. I got like little 1 kilo shots.
Oh, okay.
And so I'll just dump them in there. But
it's still more than just a dive ring, you know.
Oh yeah, It's like, and then
it's
you
a
know,
struggle
like
to get that.
Yeah, my 10-year-old will come up with like 4 of them in his hand, try to get them all. And then, but my 6-year-old, you see a little kid like dive to the bottom 8-foot pool and pick up 2 shot puts and swim up with no feet. You're like, okay, we're drown proofing this kid.
Exactly.
Like, you know, and then we'll do like diaphragmatic breathing, and then we'll see who could walk actually have a 20. I have it posted on my social media. My 6-year-old with a 20-pound dumbbell walked on the bottom through the 8-foot all the way down and back under the water, which is like a 40-second hold. A 6-year-old kid carrying a 20-pound dumbbell.
That's also a cool thing, though, because I'm thinking like, oh, that's like scuba diving. That's pretty cool that you weighted yourself down to like,
and and then we have to teach. We're teaching swim buddies and how do you become a good swim buddy and make sure you're staying bicycle and being safe. You don't do breath work by yourself. So we do that. We cook at the end of it. We make sure the kids serve each other, and then we make sure the kids clean up, and then they go around and shake everyone's hand and tell them thank you for coming, and they shake all the parents' hands, thank you for donating your time to us. And so like that was a weekly thing we did. Like, so honestly, that's the coolest thing that's happened in the cave. Like, to me, that was
no, wait, this is a weekly thing you did? I was just going to ask, how often are you doing this?
We tried to do it every Wednesday.
Okay, every Wednesday throughout the summer.
Yeah.
Because the kids are off from
school. It was
school.
probably an hour and a half to 2 hours. But, and the dads, we're all friends. And so, like, we would kind of – and the whole thing was like, hey, if any of these dads are talking, we're all interchangeable. Like, we'll get in your butt. I'll get in your butt just as he will. And if he's up, like, he's cleared hot. It's like, so you're going to respect authority. We're going to be respectful to one another. We'll get done. And you have 4 dads, so that way if 1 or 2 can't make it, you're still running the group.
Yeah, and it's nice to be like-minded. Cool. It's that's a struggle sometimes with youth sports, and because you're not like-minded with some of the people you might be coaching with, or some of the people that you might be parents of kids that you are coaching, and that you're trying to impress hard work and things like that on. So, and I'm saying you, but I'm talking about myself right now.
No, you got to be equally yoked on that one, because otherwise people could get a little sideways.
Exactly. So that's where I think, when I'm thinking of myself and coaching some of my kids' athletic endeavors and helping coach some of their athletic endeavors, the best experiences that I've had outside of just being there with my kid, but in terms of coaching, have been with like-minded coaches that, hey, this guy and I click. Like, we get it. Like, he gets it. He gets what I'm doing, and I get what he's doing. And so I could see that, your fathers, but you're putting them through the paces of this experience. So it's cool to be like-minded and have those same goals and things for your children.
Yeah. It's
awesome.
Really, and you see how different dads, how they parent and how they coach, and you're like, oh man, his attentiveness is really good there. Like, wow, I would have got pissed off, and he's cool. And then you get to back his play, and you're like, okay, I'm learning from this. Or like, when the kids are swimming at the end of it, you're kind of all talking, debriefing his dad. You're like, hey, I saw how so and so did that. Like, good job on that, how you stepped in, and like we debrief and we're cooking and kind of hanging out with his dads. It's like, my opinion, I don't have a lot of time to just screw around. So like, I'll be honest, like just sitting around watching TV or watching a ball game and getting like a bunch of beers in me, like I've done that thing. I'm not really interested in it. So like, if we're going to do something, let's like tie it into like, let's all being better and confiding in each other. Like, hey, I totally yelled at my kids earlier. I know we're trying to do this awesome thing. I totally act like an ass earlier. And you're like, well, hey, like, hold each other accountable and do that. So I don't know. It's kind of like more of a village mentality of parenting, and really looking at like where we view like American youth today.
Mm-hmm.
That's a big portion of it, because youth is different than it was when we were kids. And
I brought him up earlier, but he's on my mind because I just spoke to him last week, Zach Avanesh, or 2 weeks ago. He's really big on that. And I asked him, like, what's your what's changed? What's different? And that's what he said, is that, well, the kids have changed. Like, when they come into my gym, I got to have a lot of lighter touch, basically, is what he said, a lighter approach to things sometimes, because, I'm trying to get them there. They're not coming into the gym as tough and as strong as they used to be. It's my job to make them tougher and stronger. So
you hate to say it, you're right, and the bad part is there's no easy way to do it. There's no, you can't nice them into being tough.
Yeah.
Like, that's kind of the bear of it, right?
I like the name the Strugglers for that reason. And like you were saying, your kids seeing you struggle with something and seeing that.
Mm-hmm.
Like in my home gym, I have my platform is raised where my rack is, and then because the price of wood was like astronomical whenever I put this in, about a year and a half ago. I was like, wow, I don't really need to have it all the way across. It's turned out to be one of my favorite things about my gym because it is a family rule. Like, if I'm in the middle of a lift, you do not come on the platform. And it started as like a safety thing. I didn't want to, be looking at a corner of my eye at a 2-year-old wandering around beneath the barbell. But now it's become more of a teaching of a respect thing that you have to ask to come on the platform, and that if you step on the platform, it's time to lift. So, I've got I've got a 16-pound Atlas stone, and a guy was just laughing when he came into my gym, like, what the heck's this for? And I said, that's my 4-year-old's PR. Like, he lifts that 16-pounder, and he puts it over the bar, and I put the bar in lower for him, and it's fun.
Yeah, that's just as important as your PR. Like, that's the thing.
It's huge. I mean, he was proud of himself, and I can confidently say no other 4-year-old in our community has lifted an Atlas stone. So I was proud of him as a father.
Exactly. And that's the thing. Like, I've always believed in, like, having the most extraordinary experience you can at life is one of my goals in life. Is just if what you would think life is going to be and mediocre, and I don't mean money, I don't mean any of that, like, what is the expected outcome? I want to be as far above that as possible in the level of experience. Yeah. So, I would say that. Like, most parents aren't having their kids do a 16-pound Atlas stone. I bet your kid loved it. He loved the affection and the positive atmosphere that you provided him because of that. He's now felt struggle and strain just a little bit sooner. Yeah. And, I remember pinch gripping 2 5-pound plates when I was... I can't remember. I should say, I was too young to remember. 2, 3, maybe. Yeah. And Pop said I kept trying it, and I finally did it. I went to did it, and it pinched my skin. And I picked it, and it pinched it, and he said I threw it down, and I just got mad. I went, and I picked it up, and I finally did it, and then I threw it down after. But I remember at 2 or 3, I got there's that level. Yeah. Like, you could just get mad and do some
hyped
stuff.
Up, yeah.
Hyped up, and it's like you can't teach that. You just have to experience that until you're like, oh, I'm frustrated to the point that this is a thing. And like, that was probably the first rep of my life that pushed me in that direction.
Like all the smaller round heads, the 1s, the 2s, the 3s, the 4s they're collectively value, but they're priceless to me because those are my children's. Like, they look exactly like the ones I lift. And it's perfect. They come in and they can challenge themselves. Great. I can say, hey, you were doing 2-pounders, why don't you try a 3-pounder? Give it a shot.
Back in your house. Yeah, I need to get those back in my house. My kids will dig those. I forgot about them. I mean, they could come to the gym and mess with them. So real quick about the strugglers. So
go ahead.
We named them the strugglers, and it was pretty funny. So like, second or third workout in, one of the kids next door, I love him to death, super smart kid. He was like, hey, Mr. Bert, so when we get to the next, when we get better, can we get to the next level? Can we change our name from the strugglers to like the almost theirs or something like that? Which I thought was so cute and funny. And I got thinking about it. And I'm like,
that's awesome.
And I was like, all right, we're about to have a lesson. And I was like, who here believes one day you'll meet the girl of your dreams, you'll get the job of your dreams, and you'll live happily ever after? And all the dads raised their hand, all the kids raised their hand. I was like, it's a lie. It's a lie. And everyone started dying laughing. I was like, there is no happily thereafter. There is no perfect life. There is no perfect. I love my wife to death. There's no but it doesn't make life perfect or easy. Owning Sorin doesn't make my life perfect or easy. And I was like, Luke Day is a strength and conditioning coach for the University of South Carolina. It doesn't make. He still has struggles. I have struggles every day. You have struggles. We all have different struggles. They have different categories and maybe more zeros behind their name at times at different levels. I was like, so the thing is, no, we're not. We're never going to change our name from the strugglers. That's the point of this. We will learn how to struggle well in life. We will always be strugglers. I'm a struggler. You're a struggle. We are the strugglers. This is what we're going to do. Yeah. And everyone's like, cool, got it. So we're the strugglers.
Struggling is a choice, and it's you don't have to. Well, maybe you force your kids to, but I just mean philosophically, to struggle is to choose to face adversity.
Yeah.
You know, so
Yeah.
seeing the name
It's struggle or give up. Really, are the only
exactly.
two options.
So seeing the name as a continuous process makes sense
Yeah.
to me. You know, you
Yeah,
sold
that's
me on the
cool.
strugglers. I'm ready to buy the T-shirt. So
Yeah, we do need to make a strugglers T-shirt, and maybe we'll have like chapters of strugglers.
there you
It's like,
go.
it is pretty freaking cool.
This
Like
is getting a little
I
Fight
would
Clubby,
love-
but you know, it's okay.
the first thing about strugglers is well strugglers.
Yeah, is that you don't change the name from the strugglers.
You can't be the almost there.
You're not
Just
almost
play
there.
it.
You're never almost
Yeah.
there. You're always
You're never
struggling.
almost there. Yeah, it's pretty cool though.
Yeah.
Like, and if nothing else, if we could teach our kids that's a thing, and the earlier we could teach them, like,
Wow.
then it's worth it.
I think the best I can give my children would be opportunities, but I can't do it for them. You know,
Right.
so they've got to make the choice to struggle. Like in
Sure.
the bounds of the opportunities that I can give them, and
Yeah.
you know, I think that's important to show your children that. So I think the strugglers, I think it's great. I like it. I might say you might have just founded a Pittsburgh chapter. I mean,
Hey,
we have a fantasy
how
football
cool
league
would
that we
that be,
started.
right?
So in my
Oh,
neighborhood.
how cool would that be? Because you figure if you had what if you had groups of dads
Yeah.
that were basically like pouring into their kids with a common thread of, attentiveness, attitude and effort.
Mm-hmm.
Like, I mean, make up your own stuff after that. I mean, I'm not trying to run this thing, but you get what I'm saying. Like, and if we all were able to learn from each other, like, because it was interesting. You're looking at 2 or 3 other successful people, 2 of us business owners, one a high-end manager and one a SEC strength coach. And for everyone to laugh when it was like, hey, who believes that their life would be easy after that? And everyone raised their hand and everyone just went, yeah, right.
Exactly.
And it's like, oh yeah, it is a fairy tale. That's not a thing.
Sure.
And if you hold on to that fairy tale, it's just
For sure.
you're missing it. Right?
Like Garage Gym Radio produces this podcast, and that's
Shout out to them.
shout out to them for producing this podcast. And Jake does his own podcast, Garage Gym Experiment, and he's had roundtable discussions with company owners and things. And yeah, I mean, if there's one thing that's hit home is that nothing's cushy. It's a grind, and it sounds like it. I don't know it firsthand. I don't own a company, but it like you said, everyone has their own struggles, has their own things that they're facing. I like your 3, I don't even know what the values, I guess you'd call them, the 3 values of the strugglers. For years, I started out, I used to tell my children, I'd say the same 2 things before they'd go out on the field or before they'd go to school, before anything, basically. It became like my 2 things were play hard, have fun. Play hard, have fun. But then it morphed into play hard and you'll have fun. Because I started I started to just kind of talk through with my oldest child that, like, well, wait, if you're giving it everything you got, it's going to be fun. I'm sure that drill was tough, but give it what you got and you'll have fun,
Yeah,
So play hard and you will have fun is what it became. So I've only got one value that I say to them before they go out there, but all the other things get tied into that, listening to your coach and things like that. So the things that you mentioned as far as like, hey, no matter what dad is speaking, the common ideals, I'm in. I think I think I got to look into it. I might try to morph my fantasy football league that I started. It's a father-son fantasy football league, parent-child fantasy football league that was a lot of fun, where we let the kids just do what they're going to do, all these 8-year-old boys. Right. So, oh my gosh, we had some wild draft picks going on. And I
can only imagine.
I mean, being the commissioner, I had to screen the trade requests, and that was even crazier. All the trades coming in. I was like, wait, what are you trading for this guy? Like, why do you like him?
No.
I don't care if he has the same number as you. You're not going to trade away your number 1 pick. Like, what are you doing?
Right.
So, it was a wild time. We're going to, actually, this weekend we're having like a season end kind of party to present the trophy to the winners.
Oh, cool.
And, just kind of get together. So, maybe I'll morph it into like, hey, guys, this summer, welcome to the strugglers. Because I have a lot of odd object implements and things. I can have the kids doing some farmer cares and things, and if their dads are supervising and helping them, I've got I mentioned the Atlas stones.
Yeah. Well, that's the thing. It's just as long as you make it fun. But the cool part is with those three tenets, we kind of learned that we could always after action with them. You know, and you could always call out like, hey, you know, Ezra was showing like when Ezra did this today, which of the three tenets would that be? So then the kids have to kind of think through it. And like, hey, when we told him to do this and he did it right away and he remembered it, was that effort, was that attitude, or was that attentive? Oh, that was attentiveness. Oh, cool. He remembered that. So like start building in like, what does that really mean? Because I think sometimes everyone throws out these integrity. Like, what does that really mean?
Yeah.
Like, what
do you
we,
really get it? Yeah.
Give me an example of that. So like, and then what I found was cool from a parenting side, I was able to have that vernacular understood in context. So I'm driving down the road and my kid's being a butt. I go, hey buddy, let's check your attitude right now. And the attitude is one, I was like, your effort's doing pretty good. Your attentiveness, you listened right away, but your attitude. So like, then he knows like, these are pillars. I'm falling short on one of the pillars and I've already agreed to, like the agreement we've made is we don't fall short on these pillars.
Yeah.
So then we could, in a sober moment, we all agree these are good things. You're showing me the opposite of that right now on one or more. Let's talk about why that's happening. And so it's been nice because now the kids are starting to have like a little bit of context to it.
Yeah. I mean, I think it's like we were talking about earlier where, you know, you go to school and no one even knows what your T-shirt is and things like that. I'm sure your children, after being in the strugglers, they go to school and although some of their classmates may not have the same experiences and things, those tenets probably stick with them. And, you know, just like lifting and putting in the reps, you're putting in those mental kind of reps and experiences that hopefully will habitually come back to them in the best of ways.
I hope so. I mean, I think you run the drill enough times, something has to stick, you know. And we try to teach them like the whole thing, like have an intent. Like everything has an intent. Like when we eat breakfast, it was like, hey guys, like what is this? Is this a protein, a fat, a carb? Like we just kind of do those little experiments through the whole. And now my 6-year-old, like my daughter will pick up a muffin, and my 6-year-old's like, you got to eat protein with that. Like you have to balance it out. Get a meat stick or something. And it's just like, oh, cool, you're getting it. And you know, and now I find it funny because I hunt and my kids eat game a lot.
Yeah.
Every meat we eat, they always ask, well, what is this? Is this elk or is this deer or is this hogs? And I was like, this is elk today. They're like, all right, cool. And I was just told them yesterday morning, I was like, you don't understand. You eating elk steaks for breakfast is rather rare.
Yeah.
Like that's not something that a normal 6-year-old
not a regular,
is doing. It's not a regular thing. I said, but here's the thing, it's a superfood and it's super healthy for you and mommy and daddy care so much about you. We're trying to I know it's not fun eating, you know, for dinner eating Brussels sprouts, jasmine rice and elk steaks. Like that's what my 6-year-old had last night, but he's like, "Oh, this is really good." I go, "Finally, we've made this really good." I was like, "We could have given you anything in your first years of life, and that would have been easier on us."
Oh yeah.
I was like, "But because we like can, but also because we like we'll do the hard things." Like, and then my kids know I drive them crazy. I'll just say hard things make hard things, and they'll go make us stronger.
Nice.
Like they just know that is the thing, you know.
That's right.
And so I go, yeah, mommy and daddy did the hard things. We made you guys eat these foods because if you know these things are good for your body, and you notice you guys don't get very sick, you notice you're very fast and you're very strong, and you're all the things that are cool, because we could have given you a lot of things that would have made it real easy to make you eat, but we're going to do the hard things first because we want you to be with us for a long time to be able to do these things.
Play hard and you'll have fun. You know, so
right?
you got to do those hard things and then you'll have fun.
Hard things make us stronger.
They do. I like it. I'm going to roll that in. Well, I mean, we're talking a lot about parenthood. I think it'd be cool to end out on, I mean, you're the son of Richard Sorin. You have chosen to pursue, this path that your father laid out before you and continue that path and continue the family business. Was that known to you throughout college that like this is something I want to do? Or you said you took the full-time job after college. Was that a placeholder at the time? Like, well, I'll work at the company for a while before I get on my feet. Like, you know, what was the shape of things for you in terms of your life outlook?
Life outlook in high school was go to college and live out the 80s college movies.
Nice.
Like that was basically what I thought it was like. There was not a lot of ambition. I always knew life I wanted to be extraordinary and interesting. I just didn't know the path of how to do that. I always enjoyed lifting, but not like loved it. I got to college and through a wild Forrest Gumpian like set of interesting things, I ended up on the track team, had a good career, and there's where I fell in love with training and like what that does.
Working out in the gym. I heard this story.
Yeah. So we'll do that on a different podcast.
I was going to say it's a longer story, but I'll just say
longer story.
I'm aware of the Forrest Gumpian time of your life. And it is
it
Forrest Gumpian. That's a great way to describe it.
Yeah. So, but during that time, I went from liking lifting to falling in love with lifting to where it was physical and human performance was like 98% of what was in my brain at all times. Like that was it. They started to click. I started understanding it. I started seeing the cause and effect. I realized hard things made me stronger. I wanted to eat hard things as fast and as quick as I could because I knew I wanted to be stronger. I got addicted to it. I got addicted to being stronger every 4 weeks. I got addicted to PRs. I got addicted to I input effort, amazing things shoot out the other end. And that was the economy that was built into my hard drive that 17 through 22 years old, it was like, oh, I figured out how this works, this being life. Now, of course, I still had to learn a lot, but the basics of it were pretty on, you know.
There's a lot of people that age that don't figure out things, so it's a blessing and a fortunate thing that you did, you know.
Well, yeah, and exactly. And if I had to learn it through such an obscure sport as hammer throwing, great, right? And so that kind of built that framework. And so about halfway through my college career, because I hadn't really thought of what I wanted to do, and about halfway through it, I was like, man, I really love lifting weights. I really love the iron game. This is something I want to be in. And it's like, you know, you don't have to be a Bart Simpson to figure out, like, I want to be in the strength world. Oh, Dad owns a strength company. I grew up around it. Shortest path is probably just doing that, you know?
Absolutely.
And so I got out. My number one goal to start wasn't necessarily to set the training world on fire or anything. It was to help Dad. He was stressed out. He was running a one-man show. All right, I'm his helper. What now? What? Like, what can I help? What can I take off of your plate? You know. And then about a year or two into it, I started seeing through clear eyes and going, you know, fresh eyes see far. And you kind of go, maybe instead of you taking something to the post office every day, like maybe I'll set up a FedEx account. But sometimes it's literally that simple. Like, hey, why don't we get a dedicated fax line instead of like when people call us, they hear like thing. Like those are some of the stupidly simple ones.
Yeah, but I mean, it was just routine probably and busy life.
It was, this is how we do it, and you know, a certain age or whatever. And so like I started doing things like that, adding additional value and coming up with a couple things. Nice. And so at that point I was like, oh, this is like what I'm going to do. Like, I really like this. This is great. Yeah. And then, you know, you start getting fulfillment and starting building an identity of who you are in the ecosystem and where your value proposition could be. And you wake up 20 something years later and you don't know anything else, and that's how it is. Yeah. You just go, this is what I do.
Exactly. Like, it becomes who you are. Yeah.
Yeah. No, it's so funny. People go like, what's your exit strategy? Like other business people maybe like, what's your exit strategy? I'm like,
from my life?
Like, what am I going to go do?
Yeah.
Like, I really, it's wild. I'm like, I don't even, they're like, you know, like you build up the business and you sell it. And I'm like, then what?
Yeah.
Like, okay, that doesn't make sense. And so people look at me like I'm insane because I'm just like, no, that's like, this is what I do. Okay, move on.
Yeah, I mean, and I'm not saying you have to work until the day you die, but I think there's, I won't go into depth here, but I'll just say that there are more than one company that when the original owner didn't pass it on and wasn't able to pass it on, even not even to a family member, but at least to an heir apparent, we'll phrase it that way, that company did not do well. And if it's still around, it's not respected like it used to be. So I think, I won't speak for your father, but I'd take a wild guess that he probably feels pretty good knowing that you're involved, So
I hope he does.
Cool.
He says he is, and that's in part there's a lot of pride there. Like,
exactly.
I realize, yes, I've helped it make the business make improvements, but the first 19 years it was him swinging the sword by himself, and I'm not so foolish to think that what I did could be any bit possible with what he did at a harder time that was more uncertain with less support and all this other stuff. So, I promised him a long time ago that I would do as best I can for him while he's still here to thank him for the opportunity he gave me, because without him, I would have no opportunity to do any of this stuff, and I wouldn't matter at all in this space, or it would have been a long, long road. So, that's one of the big goals is like, hey, I want to show you what my vision of this is while you're still here, so you can enjoy this with me. Yeah. Let's enjoy this ride together. Like, there isn't a number. We don't have a number. People are like, well, what's your number? There is not a number.
What's the exit strategy? Yeah.
No. This is what we do, and now I hope and pray that there will be someday an heir apparent. There will be one of my kids would be the best obvious choice. Probably going to be my daughter. She's hard. But if there's not, we'll look at it then. But, I choose not to run it like, I'll go to 55 and then I'll see what happens. Like, you never know what's going to happen in life. But, I'm happy with what it is and what we're doing. And I still believe in the mission. I still believe we could make some changes in the strength world that the world hasn't seen. And as long as that's there, then I'll keep showing up to work.
Heck yeah. Well, I don't have an exit strategy here because I'd like to stay in contact. I'd like to definitely make it down there to see the museum, put something up on my Vintage Weights PGH channel, or do a home gym history there, something of that effect, or just come under the radar and enjoy it myself. So, either way, I'll enjoy it.
I'd love to have you. You could stay at the house. I'd love to host you. We have the museum. You could hang out in the cave. We have a library upstairs. I jokingly call it all the strength stuff that isn't on the internet.
Nice.
We have hundreds of books that Pops has collected since he was a kid, like his original strength and health. Yeah, and that's why we have it there, because we want people to be able to come and sit there and have a cup of coffee for a few hours and just read stuff that you can't read anywhere else, and first editions, and a lot of memorabilia. I mean, this stuff doesn't live if people aren't breathing air and breathing life into it, and so we would love for you to come, and I'd love to learn from you. I'd love to hear what you think, and let's do some videos and do some cool stuff and talk some.
Well, thank you so much for coming on, Bert, and please, listeners, check out sorinx.com. There's so much content on there to explore and take a look at their products, but also take a look at the history they have on there and some of their other media files and podcasts and things that you can click on. And, of course, I am Rob from Vintage Weights PGH, and this is Home Gym History, produced by Garage Gym Radio. Thank you so much, Bert. I appreciate you coming on.
Thank you so much, Rob.